Chapter 340. When Lin Xiao arrived near the base, it was already 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. She stopped the car at a distance where the base guards couldn't hear the sound of the car. Then she put the car into the space. Then she walked towards the base. The gate of the base was closed at night. Lin Xiao clawed at the wall with her claws and climbed up stealthily. Then she climbed to the top of the wall and jumped down into the base. There were many dark places in the base at night, and no light could reach them. Only in the inner area would there be street lights. The lights in the outer area were concentrated in the residential buildings, and the electricity in other places was cut off. Therefore, people living in the base would not go out at night if there was nothing important. Lin Xiao walked along the dark road and headed for Area D. When she was 1 kilometer away from Lin Wenwen's community, she smelled several scents. These unusual smells stopped her in her tracks. Lin Xiao found a dark corner and released Shen Yuzhen. She pointed in a direction and said, "The person you're looking for is over there. Right now, your night vision is no different from your daytime vision. You also have to learn to analyze the smell of each person. Control your hunger and don't hurt innocent people." Shen Yuzhen nodded and looked in the direction Lin Xiao pointed. She suddenly sniffed with her nose and there was a familiar and disgusting smell of smoke drifting from afar. Her eyes immediately widened, and her lips began to crack, revealing her teeth. Lin Xiao said, "Go. Be careful not to expose yourself. You'll be fine as long as you don't talk." Shen Yuzhen nodded and turned to leave. Lin Xiao followed her invisibly because she told Shen Yuzhen to go. She also went in the direction of Lin Wenwen's community. She didn't follow very closely. She looked at the surrounding buildings. Then, like a monkey, he climbed up the wall in a few steps. Standing on the roof, she watched Shen Yuzhen walk through the dark alley next to her, or hide when she found someone passing by in advance. When the person left, she continued to come out and quietly walked forward. At this time, outside the community where Lin Wenwen lived, 2 groups of people met at an intersection. "Deputy Leader Pu? Why are you here so late at night?" Lu Tianyi stood on one side of the road and asked Pu Xuecang, who was standing across from him. Beside him were Kong Qingming, Huang Shou, Lu Jing, and a few others. On the other hand, Pu Xuecang, who was standing opposite them, had his hands in his pockets as he sized up Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming from head to toe. He smiled and said, "Yo, aren't these the 2 chrysanthemums from Leader Zhou's side? I also want to ask you, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? Could it be that there was something shameful? Is that why you came here in the dark?" Both his tone and the smile on his face carried a hint of malicious sarcasm. There were even some evil desires surging within. Pure chrysanthemums, of course, referred to the 2 of them who were virtuous chrysanthemums, because the men in the base who coveted their androgynous beauty gave them this name after they couldn't get their hands on them. Lu Tianyi just smiled faintly. His smile was very elegant, and he didn't look angry. "Deputy Leader Park, if there's nothing else, please go back. This is the guest area of Special A, and it's not good for you, a deputy leader of Area B, to appear in someone else's territory." Kong Qingming, who was standing next to him, also had a smile on his face. However, Kong Qingming's smile had always been a little evil, and when matched with his beautiful face, it had a strong and seductive charm. They didn't react to the way Pu Xuecang addressed them. They maintained their original expressions as if they hadn't heard it. However, Huang Bao and the others behind them had already changed their expressions. They stared at Pu Xuecang and the others with gloomy faces. Pu Xuecang just smiled faintly at Lu Tianyi's words and said, "I'd like to ask you, what qualifications do you have to talk about me here? Even if I'm not your direct superior, I'm still a deputy leader. Before you speak, watch your tone." Lu Tianyi didn't care about his warning at all. He smiled faintly and said, "This is Area D. Neither you nor I have the qualifications. I was just advising you out of goodwill. You, a deputy leader of Area B, came to the guest area of Special A at night for no reason. I don't know if you've gotten Leader Wu's permission. If he knows you're here, he might misunderstand something. Besides, I'm here with Leader Zhou's order and Leader Wu's permission. We came here on the orders of our Leader Zhou, and with the approval of Leader Wu." He looked at him coldly and said, "It's none of your business that I'm here. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business." Suddenly, footsteps came from the side of the road, and then a figure appeared. Because the light in the residential area couldn't reach this side, the people present could only see the silhouette of a woman. Suddenly, they picked up the flashlights they brought with them and shone them over. They saw a woman with long hair walking slowly toward them. They picked up the flashlights they brought with them and shone them over. They saw a long-haired woman slowly walking towards them. Lu Tianyi and the others looked at the woman strangely. It was already late at night, and normal people rarely came out to exercise. Not to mention a woman who came out alone. This was too unreasonable. When Pu Xuezong saw the woman's face clearly, his expression changed. He suddenly tilted his head and asked the person next to him in a low voice, "Why is she here? Wasn't this woman locked in the room in Area F?" The expressions of the people behind him also became solemn as they stared at the woman walking toward them. Xin Yuzhen walked over slowly. Her face under her disheveled hair stared at Pu Xuezong expressionlessly. "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and take her away." Seeing that Shen Yuzhen was less than 3 meters away from them, Pu Xuezong shouted at the person next to him. His subordinates immediately walked out and were about to surround Shen Yuzhen and capture her. "Wait a minute. What do you want?" Lu Tianyi suddenly shouted at Pu Xuezong. He immediately took a few steps forward and stood between them and Shen Yuzhen, stopping them from moving. "Who are you? Why are you still out so late at night? Hurry up and go back." Kong Qingming also came over, then turned his head and said to Shen Yuzhen. Shen Yuzhen smelled the fragrance of Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming, and the hunger in her stomach began to churn. She hurriedly took 2 steps back and slightly distanced herself from them. She shook her head, then raised her hand and pointed at Pu Xuezong. A strong hatred flashed in her eyes. Kong Qingming sensed the surging aura on her body. Of course, he could also see her hatred for Pu Xuezong from her eyes. Suddenly, he somewhat understood what this woman was here for. He turned his head and said to Pu Xuezong, "Did you do something to her?" Chapter 341. You must have done something to her. She's obviously here to make trouble for you. Kong Qingming turned around and said to Pu Xuezong. Lu Tianyi looked at Shen Yuzhen and then turned back to stare at Pu Xuezong. The smile on his face had disappeared, and he said to Pu Xuezong with a stern expression, "Deputy Leader Pu, you'll run into ghosts if you walk too much at night. Have you ever thought that one day someone will come to take revenge on you for what you've done behind the scenes?" They all knew that Pu Xuezong was not a good person to begin with. He especially liked to play with other people's women behind the scenes, and it was a compulsive act. After playing with those women, he could never find them again. Many people suspected and hated him, but there was nothing they could do about him. That was because he only picked ordinary people or ability users with low status. If they were found out later, he would send people to kill them and so on. Now a woman was standing in front of him, staring at him with hatred. He must have done something to her. And just now, Pu Xuezong wanted to arrest her in front of him. Hearing Lu Tianyi's words, Pu Xuezong's eyes flashed with a faint killing intent. He suddenly laughed and said, "Minister Lu, I don't understand what you're talking about. This woman is a dangerous person. To prevent her from harming other people in the base, you'd better hand her over to me." Saying that, he raised his hand and crooked his finger at his men behind him. The few people who had been stopped by Lu Tianyi immediately leaned towards Shen Yuzhen again. Lu Tianyi saw that Pu Xuezong dared to brazenly arrest people as if they didn't exist. His face darkened. Just as he was about to speak, a hand suddenly stopped him from behind. Lu Tianyi looked back and saw Shen Yuzhen shaking her head at him with gratitude. Then, she walked past him toward Pu Xuezong. "Don't go over there. It's dangerous. What do you want?" Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming both shouted at her. But because of Shen Yuzhen's current attitude, they didn't stop her again. First, they respected her. Second, they were curious about what this woman would do to Pu Xuezong. Moreover, they would be watching closely from the side, ready to make a move. Even if he couldn't defeat the level 6 Pu Xuezong, he couldn't just watch as he was taken away. Seeing that Shen Yuzhen didn't run away in fear when she saw him and even ran directly to him, Pu Xuezong felt a little strange. Now, seeing that she insisted on walking toward him, out of curiosity, Pu Rukang suddenly raised his hand and gestured for his subordinates to stop. Then, he waited for Shen Yuzhen to walk up to him. Shen Yuzhen walked in front of him, and several people shone their flashlights directly into her eyes. However, she stared at Pu Quokang without blinking. What do you want? Although I don't know how you ran out, I didn't expect you to not return to your home, but to come to me like an idiot. I really don't know what's going on in your head. Roar. Just as Pu Chitsong was about to say something to Shen Yuzhen, before he could finish his sentence, all of a sudden, Shen Yuzhen roared at him with a ferocious look on her face. At the same time, she pounced at Pu Chitsong and bit him. However, Pu Rukang was still a rank 6 ability user, so his reaction was still very agile. However, when Shen Yuzhen pounced at him, he was too close to her. It was already too late for him to dodge, so he subconsciously raised his arm and swung it at Shen Yuzhen's wide-open mouth. Roar! When Shen Yuzhen was swung away, she bit off a piece of flesh from his arm. Then she fell to the side and got up with a mouthful of blood. Munch munch! Shen Yuzhen chewed on the piece of flesh in her mouth while her mouth was full of blood. Then she spat out the cloth in her mouth. After being pounced on and bitten by her, she still looked like she was eating human flesh. The others were stunned for a moment. What are you still looking at? Blow her head off. Pu Chitsong, who had been bitten off and was in so much pain that his entire face twitched, roared angrily. Only then did his subordinates suddenly react. They subconsciously took out their guns and started shooting at Shen Yuzhen. Bang bang bang. A series of gunshots immediately rang out in the dark night. The sudden gunshots immediately attracted the attention of the people in the community. The sudden sound of gunfire immediately attracted the attention of the people in the community. Roar! When they started shooting, Shen Yuzhen suddenly dodged and rushed into the flower bed at the side. Roar! When they started fighting, Shen Yuzhen suddenly dodged and rushed into the flower bed at the side. It moved very fast like an animal hunting in the night. Don't let her escape. She has become a zombie. We can't let her run around in the base. Pu Chitsong covered his arm with a pained expression. After saying this, he suddenly noticed the wound on his hand. Pu Qiakang covered his arm with a pained expression. After he finished speaking, he suddenly noticed the wound on his arm. You're right. He didn't expect that this woman had become a zombie. The way this woman pounced on him and her twisted face were no different from a zombie. The way this woman pounced on him and her twisted face were no different from a zombie. Pu Chitsong originally only wanted to inquire about the two women from the Netherworld King's base. He didn't expect to meet Zhou Shihui's people before he even reached the place. Moreover, the woman he had caught 2 days ago to torture ran out. Now this woman seemed to have become a zombie. She actually went crazy and bit him. Now the wound on his hand must have been infected by the zombie virus. No, he had to go to the hospital. No, he had to go to the research institute. Those useless people in the hospital had no way to deal with the zombie virus. Only the research institute had a way. At this time, Pu Chitsong was already frightened by the fact that he was infected with the zombie virus. Now all he could think of was how to prevent himself from becoming a zombie. Seeing that his subordinates were chasing after the woman, he quickly turned around and ran to the research institute. Thus Lu Tianyi, Kong Qingming, and the others were left behind. Fuck! What happened just now? Huang Shou looked like he had seen a ghost. Who knows? The others also looked like they had seen a ghost. They actually saw a zombie in the base. What did this mean? It meant that zombies had sneaked in. It meant that the base might not be safe from now on. Why didn't she attack us? And her target seems to be only the one surnamed Pu. Lu Tianyi suddenly murmured. When the others heard his question, they were immediately stunned. Because she's only here for revenge. She won't harm people. Suddenly, a hoarse voice sounded from the side. Lu Tianyi and the others were shocked and immediately looked in the direction of the voice. At the same time, the flashlights in their hands shone over. It was a woman wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap in the middle of the night. She stood there with a suspicious look, looking at them with the corner of her mouth. Huh, it's your sister. Kong Qingming immediately turned his head and said to Lu Tianyi in surprise when he saw the woman. Chapter 342. A hint of joy flashed through Lu Tianyi's eyes, but he didn't show it. He turned to Kong Qingming and said, "Don't talk nonsense in the base. After all, if her identity was exposed in the base, it would be troublesome." Kong Qingming rolled his eyes. Yes, got it. Lu Qianni turned his head and looked at Lin Xiao. It's really you. I thought Leader Wu had found someone else. Lin Xiao glanced at him and asked, Why are you here? Why are you here so late? Lu Qianni said, Our leader received news that Yang Chao would do something to the people in the Netherworld King's base, and then push the blame to Leader Wu. We are here to inform the people of the Netherworld King's base. Lin Xiao turned his head to look in the direction that Shen Yuzhen had escaped and sensed the situation on her side. Under the cover of the night, she seemed to be in no danger. She turned around and said to Lu Qianni, You go up and find them first. I'll leave first. There's still one problem we haven't solved. As she spoke, she raised her head and glanced in the direction of Yuan Tianqing's neighborhood. Suddenly, she disappeared in front of them. Lu Qianni, Kong Qingming, and the others looked at each other. What other troubles are there? Kong Qingming shook his head and said, I'm not sure. Let's go look for him first. It's getting late. The sooner we finish this, the sooner we can go back. As he spoke, he suddenly looked at Lu Qianni with disdain and said, You were the one who asked me to secretly pay attention to the situation here, but you actually pushed all the blame to our leader. Aren't you ashamed? Lu Qianni glanced at him with a smile, then turned his head to look around and nodded. As he walked towards the neighborhood, he said, If I don't push the blame onto the leader, wouldn't my motives be a little suspicious? Could it be that she had brought that woman in? Seems like he really turned into a zombie. I wonder what will happen to him. Kong Qingming shrugged and said, Who knows? If he turns into a zombie, that would be even better. Just blow his head off. At this time, Huang Shou asked, That female zombie staying in the base isn't that bad? Does she bite? Lu Qianni didn't care and said, No, if she brought in zombies, I don't think it will bite anyone. You saw it just now. We are in front of her, she is like a normal person. He was only targeting Pooh. It will be fun if that park guy turns into a zombie. Huang Shou asked, Don't we need to follow that park guy to check on him? Kong Qingming smiled and said, There's no need. Anyway, the direction he left just now must be to the research institute. That's their territory. It's more fun to let them mess up. Don't worry, said Lu Qianni. I don't think he can escape even if he goes to the research institute. There are also Leader Wu's men over there. This will give Leader Wu a reason, right? Huang Shou and the others looked at each other and said, So this has nothing to do with us. Lu Qianni and Kong Qingming nodded. After Lin Xiao entered the residential area, he turned around and walked toward a residential building at the edge. Then he climbed up from the balcony and other places until he reached the top of the building. She stood at the edge of the corner of the building and looked at a figure standing on the roof of the stairwell. This person actually managed to sneak in. Sure enough, Yang Chao's actions weren't considered slow. It was just that he didn't know who this bandit leader was going to target by coming here to keep an eye on them. Lin Xiao didn't know who Tang He's target was. At this time, Tang He also didn't know that someone was already watching him from behind. He looked at the place where Pu Xuezong and Lu Qianni and the others were just now, his face gloomy. That trash. Tang He frowned and cursed. Then he turned around and prepared to leave. But as soon as he turned around, his expression suddenly froze. Then he stared around and scanned. He didn't find anything suspicious, so he wondered if he was thinking too much just now. Tang He turned around and directly jumped down from the building. A transparent figure also jumped down with him. Before Lin Xiao jumped down, she turned her head and looked in the direction of Lin Wenwen's house. Suddenly, she was glad that she had come back in time. It was really great. Something almost happened here. And she glanced at Lu Qianni and the others. Did this guy think she didn't know what he was thinking? On the other side, Lu Qianni and the others entered Yuan Tianqing's residential area. After climbing up the stairs, they walked to the door of Yuan Tianqing's house. Lu Qianni and Kong Qingming knocked on the door on both sides. As soon as Long Qingying opened the door, she saw a gorgeous. She glanced down from the other person's face and then confirmed that it wasn't a woman. Well, a gorgeous man. What's the matter? Kong Qingming, whose gender was confirmed by a woman with sharp eyes by looking at his chest, was speechless. There was a little naughty smile on his face, and it hung a little stiffly on his face. But soon his unnaturalness disappeared. Maintaining his smile, he asked, Is Miss Lin Wenwen here? Long Qingying glanced at the others outside the door without moving. Then she continued to stare at him and asked, "Who are you? Why are you looking for One?" Kong Qingming felt uncomfortable being stared at by her laser-like eyes. Suddenly, he took 2 steps back and raised his hand behind him. He pulled Lu Qianni, who had just knocked on the opposite door, over. "Well, you come over here." Lu Qianni, who was suddenly pulled over, had a puzzled look on his face. He looked at Long Qingying in confusion, then turned his head to look at Kong Qingming, who was smiling a little strangely. Then he looked at the others and asked them with his eyes, what was going on? Huang Shou and the other 2 shrugged and shook their heads at the same time. Kong Qingming stood in front of Yuan Tianqing's door and looked back at Long Qingying. Then he turned his head away, showing the back of his head to the others. Coincidentally, Yuan Tianqing's door opened at this time, and Du Yuanqing stuck his head out. In the end, they saw a few strangers standing outside the door. Not only did the door open on their side, not only did the door to Lin Wenwen's room open too. "What's wrong? What's the matter? You are?" Long Qingying saw that these people were behaving strangely, and she immediately wanted to close the door with a cold expression. "Hey, please wait. We came with news about you guys and we want to tell you. Of course, if you don't want to hear it, then we can leave now." Lu Qianni reacted quickly and stopped Long Qingying in time. "About us?" Lin Wenwen's voice came from inside. She walked behind Long Qingying and looked outside curiously. Just then she heard Lu Qianni say this. Long Qingying looked back at her, then looked at Lu Qianni and the others suspiciously. At this time, Yuan Tianqing walked out from behind Du Yuanqing, looked at Lu Qianni and the others and asked, "You are?" "I'm Lu Qianni, the head of the 3rd Department of Agriculture in this base. This is my ID. Don't worry, we're not here to cause trouble." Lu Qianni took out his work ID and showed it to Yuan Tianqing. Chapter 343. Yuan Tianqing looked at them, then invited them into his room and said, "Please come in and sit down." After opening the door for Lu Qianni and the others to go in, Yuan Tianqing shouted to Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying, "You 2 come and see what's going on." "Oh." Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianqing and nodded. Then she looked at Long Qingying and said, "Let's go." When it came to Yuan Tianqing's side, Kong Qingming and Lu Qianni sat on the sofa. Yuan Tianqing and Lin Wenwen, the 2 girls, were also sitting. Only the others found a place to stand or leaned against the wall. "What's the news you're talking about?" Yuan Tianqing looked at Lu Qianni and Long Qingying and asked. Lu Qianni said, "In fact, we met some people outside the community, but they left because of us or some other reason. But I'm sure they're here for the 2 girls." Yuan Tianqing and the others looked at each other. Only Long Qingying asked coldly, "You've been here for a long time. What exactly do you want to say? Can you get to the point?" Lin Wenwen nodded and said, "You said those people just came for us. Who are they? Why are they coming for us? Did we offend them? Or do they have other intentions?" Lu Qianni looked at her and said, "Leader Wu asked us to bring the news. Because he wants to destroy the cooperation between you and Leader Wu. Yang Chao secretly wants to send people to take you 2 girls away, and Yang Chao's people took action tonight. Leader Wu doesn't have enough people now, so we came here to do something. So we brought the news for him." Kong Qingming said, "As for whether you offended Yang Chao or not, I don't know. But you offended his sister Yang Yan, and many people should know about this. I heard that Yang Chao wanted to secretly take you away, but in fact his final goal was to inject the zombie virus into you. That way he can push the blame to Leader Wu. With his current relationship with you, if there's a zombie riot, he definitely can't escape." Yuan Tianqing looked at them, and his expression darkened. "Is your information true?" Lu Qianni said, "You heard the gunshots just now. We just met Yang Chao's deputy leader, Pu Zhatsang. This man is lustful and likes to force women. I believe that his appearance here is related to these 2. After saying that, he looked at Lin Wenwen and said in a disapproving tone, "Why don't you leave with them? You 2 girls staying here will only add to the troubles of others. What does it have to do with you?" Long Qingying glared at him coldly when she was suddenly criticized by an outsider. Lin Wenwen fell silent, his eyes flashing. Seeing that Long Qingying was about to lose her temper, she hurriedly stopped her. "All right, Qing. He was right. If we stayed, we would only cause trouble for Brother Tianqing. When they come back this time we'll leave with them. Anyway, Brother Tianqing would leave this place by then. Long Qingying glanced at her, then turned around and faced the other side. The smile on Lu Tiany's face faded after hearing Long Qingying's words. Why did he feel like his good intentions had been struck by lightning? Indeed, it's none of my business, but if you bring trouble to our base and leader Wu, then it's all our business. Please leave as soon as possible, we don't welcome you here. After saying that, Lu Tiany stood up and said to Yuan Tianqing, we've brought the news we should. We helped you tonight, but there will definitely be a second and third time. Do as you see fit. If some people go missing, I'll take care of them. If some people go missing, don't beg our leader, go find Yang Chao yourself. After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the door. Kong Qingming also stood up and looked at Long Qingying with a smile. My kindness hasn't been repaid yet. Now this doomsday woman is even more unreasonable. Then he followed Lu Tiany out. Yuan Tianqing leaned against the back of the sofa with his hands crossed in front of his chest. His eyes looked serious as if he was thinking about something. Qingqing, what's wrong? Why are you so angry? I meant well. Lin Wenwen looked at Long Qingying with a strange expression, not understanding her attitude. Long Qingying snorted and said, it's nothing, I just don't like their attitude. It's our business to say that we will bring trouble to others. Why do we need them to come here and meddle in our business? Alright, they've said it. Leader Wu asked them to come. Maybe they didn't want to come. In the end, they still have to go back with their faces full of dust. Besides, if what they said is true, if someone is targeting us, we really shouldn't stay in someone else's base. Lin Wenwen said softly to her. Long Qingying turned around and stared at her. Now that you say that, who said they wanted to stay this morning? Me? Lin Wenwen immediately smiled apologetically. It's me, it's me. I was wrong, okay? I was stubborn. I knew it was dangerous, but I still wanted you to stay with me. I was wrong, I was wrong. Don't be angry. Long Qingying snorted at her. It's good that you know it yourself. You've chosen your own path. You chose the path yourself. Lin Wenwen said with a bitter face, I know. I won't be so stubborn in the future, okay? When did you two get so close? Yuan Tianqing suddenly said. The two of them turned around and saw that the others were looking at them with curious expressions. Their eyes seemed to be saying, don't tell me these two are already in a relationship? Lesbians? Lesbians? What's with that look? Aren't good friends like this? We're just two girls and you guys are suspicious of us. Aren't you thinking too much? Lin Wenwen looked at the others speechlessly. Yuan Tianqing retracted his gaze and said, but if this Lu Tiany is right, then we do have to be careful. I didn't expect the other leader of this base to see us as a thorn in their side. This is going to be troublesome. Yuanqing said, did they really cause the gunshots? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure, but we can't rule out this possibility. Let's take it that way and stay vigilant. Lin Wenwen said, if that's the case, then it's not safe for just the two of us to stay in that house. Long Qingying glanced at her and said, I'm here, what are you afraid of? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, Wenwen's right. If Clear Shadow is by yourself, you won't be able to deal with it. If you're alone, then we won't be able to arrive in time if you and Wenwen are in danger. Yuanqing said in agreement, that's right. So Deputy Leader, you go live in their house and protect them. You don't have to worry about us guys. After saying that, he winked at the others. Yuan Tianqing. Was this guy here to mess with him? Chapter 344. Kong Qingming, who was walking downstairs, said to Lu Tiany in front of him, look, you're being doubted even though you're kind. How dare you meddle in other people's business? Lu Tiany turned around and rolled his eyes at him. He said angrily as he walked, am I here to meddle in her business? I'm just here to confirm if the Miss Lu in your information is really her. I can't be bothered with these people. He just wanted to see her. Kong Qingming said, oh, I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered. You dragged us here to inform her in the middle of the night, but she didn't appreciate it. Lu Tiany said, I just don't want those two women to cause her trouble. Kong Qingming shrugged and said, well, whatever you say. By the way, Big Sister was in such a hurry to solve another problem. What does that mean? Lu Tiany thought for a moment and said, I guess she must have found someone suspicious. Her perception is much stronger than ours. She may have found something we haven't found yet. Besides, Yang Chao couldn't have sent a brainless person like Pu Rukang. Kong Qingming said in surprise, it's not Pu Rukang? But he did come for Lin Wenwen and the two women, didn't he? Lu Qianni said. Maybe Pu Rukang wasn't sent by Yang Chao, but he wanted to come. Kong Qingming looked at him and was silent for a moment. He thought it was possible. On the other side, Lin Xiao quietly left with Tang He. It didn't take long for him to see him heading for the research institute. At this time, of course, the people in the research institute had already gotten off work, and there was no one inside. But the door was opened, and the lock seemed to have been melted by the high temperature. Tang He glanced at the deformed lock that had fallen to the ground and then walked in. Lin Xiao followed him and quietly walked in. As he walked, he saw Tang He walk in front of an isolation room. It was dark inside and the door was open. But standing outside the isolation glass, he could see a staircase on the ground inside. There was a faint light and the sound of someone talking at the bottom of the stairs. Tang He looked around. It was quiet and there was no one around. He walked in and walked down the stairs. Lin Xiao did not continue to follow him. Instead, he looked at the surrounding equipment in the isolation room. Those glass jars were filled with many organs or human limbs that had been separated, floating in the water. After a few more glances, she walked down the stairs from where Tang He had gone down. After Lin Xiao walked out, there was a spiral staircase. He discovered that it was an underground research lab. The area was very large, and there were a few energy-saving lights on. There were also rows of huge glass boxes, all of which were sealed. Lin Xiao glanced at the glass box and saw the zombie that was tied up with chains. Its mouth was stuffed with braces, and its eyes were covered. She knew that these zombies were not dead. But looking at their appearance, their entire bodies seemed to have dried up. Who knew how much of the corpse's blood had been extracted for experiments? Lin Xiao didn't look at the boxes anymore. She turned her head to look at a glass laboratory on the other side. The situation inside wasn't too good. She walked over. In addition to Tang He, who had just come down, there was also Pu Zhatsong, whose face had turned pale, eyes sunken, and lips purple. There were two other people in the laboratory. Lin Xiao had seen them before. One of them seemed to be a doctor with a big beard. The other woman seemed to be his assistant. She looked back at Pu Zhatsong with a cold face. Her eyes were like ice knives as she desperately threw them at Pu Zhatsong, who was grabbing her neck. Liang. Hey, I know you have already developed a serum to control the zombie virus. Give it to me. Give it to me. Otherwise, I will kill this woman. Pu Zhatsong wrapped one arm around Emoli's neck tightly and shouted at Liang Dashu with the other hand. Liang Dashu looked at him calmly and said, Deputy Leader Pu, do you know what your face looks like now? It's as pale as paper, your eyes are dark and sunken, and your lips are purple. The virus in your body is about to infect your brain. Do you know that? Hearing his description of his appearance, Pu Zhatsong glared at him with a pair of scary eyes. He shouted angrily and anxiously, Stop talking nonsense. I want the antidote. I want the antidote. Give me the antidote. His voice was trembling uncontrollably, and it was intermittent. Liang Dashu looked at him and didn't say anything. Suddenly Emoli, who was being strangled by Pu Zhatsong, spoke first. There is no antidote here. Dr. Liang didn't develop any antidote at all. The more anxious you are, the faster the virus will spread. Pu Zhatsong tightened his grip and looked down at her. Shut up. You bitch. Don't think that I will believe you. Cough cough. Emoli, who was tightly strangled, suddenly couldn't breathe. She couldn't help but open her mouth and cough. At this moment, Tang He, who had been quietly hiding outside the door, suddenly walked in. I don't know if there is an antidote or not, but I do know that all of you are going to die. He didn't believe that the bearded researcher could really come up with an antidote. But he only knew that Pu Zhatsong was going to become a zombie. In that case, the two people who knew about this couldn't be left alive either. Who is it? Liang Dashu immediately stared at him and shouted cautiously. Why are you here? It's not like this. I can still be saved. After seeing Tang He, Pu Zhatsong's expression changed drastically. He shook his head in panic and denied it again and again. Tang He walked in and looked at him. He's right. You look no different from a zombie now. Don't you feel that your limbs are stiff and your whole body is cold? Don't you have the urge to drink blood and eat meat? After he said that, Pujitsong suddenly looked down at the blood vessel on the side of Mo Li's neck. His eyes revealed a hungry desire. At this moment, Liang Dashu, who had kept his hands in the sleeves of his research uniform, suddenly swung his hand. 3 syringes shot toward Pujitsong. At the same time, his other hand reached behind him. A gun appeared in his hand, and he raised it and aimed at Tang He. But Liang Dashu still underestimated him. He saw Pujitsong suddenly raise his head, and the hand that was originally reaching toward him grabbed the 3 syringes. Then he grabbed the 3 syringes in his hand. On the other side, when Liang Dashu was about to shoot, the gun in his hand suddenly disintegrated. When Liang Dashu saw this, he secretly cursed in his heart. Then he swung his hand, but the disintegrated gun didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it floated in the air in front of him and quickly changed shape. At this moment, Mo Li suddenly slipped and turned around. She grabbed Pujitsong's arm, who was on her neck, with both hands. Then she bent down and violently threw Pujitsong, who had just caught the syringes, away. Bang! Pujitsong was thrown to the ground by her. He lay on the ground with a confused look on his face. He didn't know what had happened, but he was thrown to the ground. Chapter 345. After Mo Li flung Pu Kuoking away, she immediately turned around and flashed to Liang Dashu's side. Then she turned around and protected him behind her. We haven't developed an antidote yet. If you want to kill us, we can't. If you want to kill us, we can't give you the antidote. Even though she knew that Tang He's ability level was much higher than hers, Mo Li still stared at them fearlessly. Pu Kuoking staggered up from the ground and shouted in disbelief, "Impossible. There must be. You're lying to me. I know you have." At this time, Tang He suddenly waved his hand. Liang Dashu's gun, which had been suspended in midair and had already transformed into a long sharp metal awl, suddenly turned around and shot toward Pu Shuatsong's head. Puff! Pu Luotsong's eyes widened in shock. The metal awl had been nailed straight into his forehead. The sharp end of the awl had sunk deep into his head. A stream of dark red blood flowed out and slid down the bridge of his nose. Plop! His body quickly fell to the ground. Tang He said indifferently, "I hope you're not mistaken. I'm not interested in the antidote you're talking about. It's impossible for anyone in this world to research that kind of thing. Otherwise, why would 5 years have passed? Why wouldn't there be a suppressant for the zombie virus? Not to mention the antidote." Mo Li didn't say anything. Liang Dashu calmly asked, "Then what do you want? Kill us?" Tang He sneered, "Do you think I'll let you go out and say that I killed the deputy leader?" Mo Li took a step back and tightly protected Liang Dashu. Both of them knew that they were doomed tonight. Mo Li's ability was spiritual, and she was only at the 5th rank. She stared into Tang He's eyes, but Tang He didn't react at all. The other party's ability was at or above the 6th rank, and he could instantly kill Pu Kuoking, who was also at the 6th rank. If they guessed correctly, this strange man was either a 6th rank Esper who was about to enter the 7th rank, or he was already a 7th rank Esper. The level gap was too big. Mo Li's ability was completely ineffective against him. Needless to say, Liang Dashu's Esper was a healer. His combat power was equal to 0 even if he had a gun, or if his marksmanship was good. However, his opponent's ability was of the metal attribute, which was enough to restrain him. Not to mention that he was a level 6 or 7 metal element warrior. It wouldn't take much effort to crush the two of them. Is that so? Hehe, since you said so, then we don't want to die too easily. At this time, Liang Dashu raised his hand, holding a hand grenade with the pin removed. His other hand pressed on Mo Li's shoulder and pushed her to the side. After saying that, he threw the grenade at Tang He and then pressed Mo Li under his body to protect her. The moment Tang He saw him take out the grenade, he had a bad feeling. He immediately reacted quickly and retreated. The body of this grenade was not made of metal, so even if Tang He reacted extremely quickly, there was no way to suppress the explosion of the body with his special ability. Therefore, he could only retreat in time to avoid it. Lin Xiao, who was watching from the outside, had already retreated far away when Liang Dashu took out the grenade. Boom dash, the entire underground laboratory was shaken by the explosion. Then the entire laboratory where Liang Dashu and the others were in was blown up, especially the glass at the entrance. All the equipment on the table near that side of the room was smashed into pieces, and the equipment on the other side that was further away was shaken and fell to the ground. There was a foul atmosphere. Doctor. Emily, who was protected under Liang Dashu, only felt her whole body shake. The power of the bomb was completely blocked by Liang Dashu. Remember David? Liang Dashu lay on her back and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he weakly handed a USB flash drive to her hand, then opened his mouth and said while vomiting blood. But before he finished speaking, his head tilted to the side. Then there was no more movement from his body. Doctor. Emily quickly climbed up and supported Liang Dashu with a panicked face. But Liang Dashu didn't give her any more reaction. Emily trembled as she felt the pulse on the side of his neck and checked his breath. When she realized that Liang Dashu was indeed dead, she was dumbfounded. Don't be in a daze, leave quickly. Yang Chao's men are here. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came over, telling her to leave quickly. Who? Emily was shocked and turned her head to look, but she didn't see anyone. But she couldn't ignore what the other party said. Holding the USB flash drive in her hand, Emily looked at Liang Dashu in her arms and could only force herself to calm down. Soon there was a series of footsteps outside. Emily immediately became alert. She turned her head to look, then lowered her head to look at Liang Dashu for the last time before putting him down on the ground. Then she stood up and quickly turned to walk out of the messy laboratory. She didn't immediately head towards the direction of the stairs, but turned and quickly left in the other direction. She couldn't let the thing that Liang Dashu just gave to her fall into the hands of Yang Chao's men. So she had to leave now to find Wu Changyue. A few seconds after she left, a group of armed soldiers rushed in. They held rifles in their hands and quickly came to the destroyed laboratory. Other than 2 corpses, there was only a pile of debris. Quickly look for the information. He must be hiding here. A man who looked like the leader shouted with a cold face. At the same time, he was also looking around, as if he was looking for something. The others immediately came in and began to rummage through the pile of debris. After searching for a few minutes, they turned the entire place upside down but found nothing. Boss, I've looked everywhere but I can't see it. Not here either. Could it be that he didn't put it here? He has a female assistant who always follows him. If she isn't here, she might have already taken the thing and run away. One of the soldiers suddenly said to the leader. The leader looked around and decisively turned around and said, Go find that woman. Keep an eye on Wu Changyue and prevent her from getting close to him. Bring some people to the exit of the base and keep an eye on her. Don't let her run out of the base. Yes. On the other side, Lin Xiao quickly left with Tang He and saw that Tang He was secretly heading towards the direction of Area B. Was he going to find Yang Chao? The bearded doctor seemed to have given something to that woman before he died. It should be very important. He just didn't know if Yang Chao already knew about the thing she took away. Lin Xiao thought about it as she followed behind Tang He and headed towards Area B. Chapter 346. Shun Yuzhen relied on her keen senses and nimble movements. Taking advantage of the darkness of the night, he managed to shake off the level 3 and level 4 psychic pursuers. She hid quietly in a tree and tried to restrain her aura. Gone. He might have run over there. Let's split up and continue looking. Okay. Seeing the people chasing after her, they quickly split up and left. Shun Yuzhen waited until they were far away before jumping down from the tree. Then, she sniffed Pu Xuezong's scent and quietly looked in his direction. So, in the broken laboratory, not long after the soldiers left, Shun Yuzhen appeared. She walked to the front of a dilapidated laboratory and looked at the 2 corpses that had not been cleaned up in time. She walked to the side of Pu Xuezong, who was blown beyond recognition, and looked at the metal drill that penetrated deep into his head. Then she squatted down, grabbed the metal drill with her hand, and forcefully broke it. Crack! Pu Xuezong's skull was directly torn off, revealing the red and white brain inside. The smell of the infected brain was not pleasant to Shun Yuzhen's nose, but it was not unpleasant either. In any case, it was no longer attractive to her. If it was Liang Dashu's brain, then it would be attractive. But she was not going to do anything to Liang Dashu. She just casually stirred the irregularly shaped metal drill in Pu Xuetsong's brain. Very quickly, she stirred and a crystal core fell out. A level 6 crystal core already had a very obvious radiance. Xin Yuzhen took the crystal core and quickly stood up. Then she turned and left. On the other side, Tang He did not know that he had been followed all the way to the inner district. He avoided all the eyes and quietly found Yang Chao's high-class apartment building and sneaked in while no one was watching. At this time, other than Yang Chao himself, Yang Hui was sitting on the sofa. "Brother, did you really send an expert to capture him?" Yang Hui sat on the sofa and looked at Yang Chao, who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Yang Chao looked out of the window and replied without turning his head, "I did. Just wait. If you want to play, wait until he takes him away. Then you can go find him." Yang Hui took a deep breath excitedly and nodded in anticipation. "All right, I'll be waiting." At this time, someone knocked on the door. The guard outside opened the door and said to Yang Chao, "Chief, Mr. Tang is here." Yang Chao turned his head in surprise. "So fast?" Then Tang He walked in from outside. No one inside or outside the house noticed that when the guard opened the door and spoke, a figure had flashed in without a trace. Lin Xiao quietly walked to the corner and stood there with his hands folded in front of his chest. He was ready to listen to the rest of their conversation. After the guard closed the door, Yang Chao looked at Tang He curiously and asked, "How is it? Did you catch him?" Tang He walked over and sat on the empty seat on the sofa. He glanced at Yang Hui. He then turned to Yang Chao and replied, "No, I was alerted by one of your useless subordinates." As soon as he said this, the two young brothers were stunned. She looked at him in confusion. Yang Chao also walked over and sat on the sofa. He asked in confusion, "Who alerted the enemy?" Tang He said with a face full of dissatisfaction, "Your deputy leader." Or, "What kind of name is that?" He suddenly ran to the neighborhood and met Zhou Shihui's people. The two sides had some arguments, and then a female zombie suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Now, after being bitten by that female zombie, he ran to your research institute and blew up the lab. I reckon that someone will report this to you soon. Yang Chao and Yang Hui looked at each other. Pu Luotsang? Why would he go there? That's Wu Chongyue's territory. Isn't he going there to look for suspicion? That idiot. As he said this, his face darkened. Yang Hui said at this time, "He seemed to have taken a fancy to the other woman beside Lin Wenwen, but I didn't expect him to be so impatient that he ran over himself. Was he discovered by the people from Pluto's base?" Tang He shook his head and said, "He hasn't entered the neighborhood yet. I guess Pluto's people don't know what's going on. But Zhou Shihui's people went in and I don't know what they're doing." Yang Chao asked with a gloomy face, "You just said that the lab blew up. What's going on? Tell me what happened there first. Is Pu Luotsang dead?" Tang He's face didn't look good either. He nodded. "Yes. He's about to become a zombie, and he still ran to that bearded man for some antidote. Then the bearded man killed himself with a grenade." "What did you say?" "Liang Dashu is also dead." But when he heard the last sentence, Yang Chao's face changed. Tang He looked at him with some doubt. "Yes, he's dead. What's wrong?" Yang Chao suddenly stood up from the sofa and asked anxiously, "He's dead? Did he say anything before he died? Or did he hide anything?" Tang He was a little confused by his reaction. Suddenly, something flashed in his mind. He thought of the purpose of Pu Luotsang running to the lab, and then his face changed slightly. He looked at Yang Chao with some doubt. "You mean he really developed an antidote for the zombie virus?" Yang Chao said, "Don't worry about this. Did you see what he hid? Or did he say anything?" Tang He's eyes flashed and then he said, "No. But the woman beside him is not dead. If you think he has something to hide, then he must have given it to that woman." Yang Chao abruptly turned around and quickly walked to the door to open it. Then he said a few words to the guard outside the door, and the guard quickly left. Only then did he close the door and return. He glanced at Yang Hui before saying to the other two, "That's right. That Liang Dashu really did have some amazing breakthrough in his experiments. I suspect that it should be related to the zombie virus. He has been focusing on this aspect, so I believe him." His results must be related to alleviating the zombie virus. Then he looked at Tang He and said, "But now he's dead. If he didn't hide the results of his research, then it's on the woman beside him." Yang Hui and Tang He's faces were filled with disbelief as they stared at him in shock. Tang He reacted quickly. "Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and catch that woman," Yang Chao said. "Didn't you see that I just sent someone?" Yang Hui suddenly asked hesitantly. "Then, should we catch that Lin Wenwen?" Yang Chao said lightly, "Catch? Why not? We've alerted the enemy this time, so we'll wait for the next time. Anyway, they won't leave the base so soon. Even if they want to leave, I'll find a way to make them stay. And I'm going to turn her into a zombie to make trouble for Wu Changyue." After saying that, a gloomy and calculating expression flashed across his mature and charming face. Chapter 347. Lin Xiao's face was also gloomy. A cold light flashed through her slightly closed eyes. If she didn't control it, the killing intent in her body would have overflowed and rushed towards the three men. These three men dared to target her family's Wenwen. Fortunately, she came back and followed them to investigate the situation. Otherwise, she didn't know how the three men would continue to attack Lin Wenwen behind her back. Even if Yang Hui didn't say anything, Lin Xiao could clearly see the strong desire for violence in his eyes. Not only did he want to rape and humiliate her, but he also wanted to turn her into a zombie to deal with Wu Changyue. Lin Xiao slowly turned around and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling glass window. The glass door was open and led to the balcony outside. Very good, Yang Chao dared to stare at her sister. Did he forget that he also had a sister? She calmly walked out of the balcony, nimbly climbed onto the railing and then flipped up. She directly went to the roof. The three people in the room still didn't know that there was an extra zombie in the room they were in and heard their conversation. After Lin Xiao went to the roof, she changed her position and then flipped down from the roof. She directly flipped to another balcony. She stood outside the balcony, looking at Yang Yan and the two kids in the room, seemingly making something delicious for them. There was a man next to her, holding a tablet and playing some kind of standalone game. Lin Xiao stared at the people in the room, then turned to look at the armed man standing next to her. One on the balcony, one in the room and two at the door. A total of 4 level 5 paranormals were protecting the family. At this time, the man on the balcony was playing with the rifle in his hand, disassembling it, reassembling it. "Come here, Debao, look. Isn't this your favorite onion pancake? Mom asked someone to make it for you, come eat." Yang Yan put a plate of delicious pancakes on the table. A woman who looked like a servant stood cautiously at the side, looking at Yang Yan with worry and fear. She was afraid if this pancake couldn't get Yang Yan's son to like it. In the next second, this pancake along with the plate would fly towards her face. At this time, there were already 2 or 3 bruises on the servant's face, and there were some broken porcelain plates on the ground by her feet. The trash can was also filled with some baked but uneaten pancakes. She secretly glanced at the pancake in the trash can with her drooling eyes, but she didn't dare to touch it. This family did not have to worry about food or clothing. The mistress didn't know how to cook, so she asked her to be a servant, but she gave her 2 steamed buns as a reward every day. However, apart from these 2 steamed buns, she was not allowed to take anything else, even if it was to be poured into the trash can. The servants hated these people. They had the support of big figures behind them, but they could waste food like this. The pancakes that were poured into the trash can were enough to feed 3 or 4 adults outside. Lin Xiao looked at Yang Yan with a cold glint in his eyes. At this time, Yang Yan was holding a small bowl in her hand and using chopsticks to pick up a piece of pancake. Then she reached out to the little boy who was huddled up on the sofa. "Come, Debao. Smell it and see if it smells good. Do you want to eat it?" Yang Yan coaxed the little boy. The little boy was wrapped in a sheet and curled up on the sofa. Seeing Yang Yan stretch out the pancake, he sniffed it. Suddenly, with a look of disgust, he swung his hand and directly knocked the chopsticks and pancake out of Yang Yan's hand. "I don't want it. It's not tasty, not tasty," the little boy shouted after hitting it, and then covered his head with the blanket again. His whole body was wrapped in the blanket and he didn't come out. Seeing him like this, Yang Yan wasn't annoyed. But as soon as she turned around, she reached out to pick up the whole plate of pancakes on the table and then swung her hand hard, smashing it at the servant who had been cowering on the side. Make it again. If you can't make something that my son likes to eat today, you're not allowed to leave. She screamed at the servant with an angry face. Seeing the plate coming at her, the servant was already prepared in her heart. She hurriedly raised her 2 arms to protect her head and face. Clang, the plate hit her arm. After being hit by the plate, the servant didn't dare to talk back. Instead, she immediately knelt on the ground, picked up the plate and pancake that had fallen, and said timidly, yes, yes, I will make it again. Hurry up and go, why are you still kneeling there? Yang Yan shouted at her angrily. She couldn't get rid of the anger in her heart. Seeing her son like this now, she wanted to chop those women into pieces and feed them to the dogs. If it weren't for them, her son wouldn't have been so scared. Her son wouldn't even be able to eat. He would vomit as soon as he ate, and could only drink water. As a last resort, she thought of asking someone to make some delicious pancakes to see if her son would eat them. The result was still the same. And her brother had promised to help her deal with those people. But now he was still living well, and nothing had happened to him. This made the anger in Yang Yan's heart uncomfortable, but she had nowhere to vent it. That was why she kept hitting the servant to vent her anger. The man who was playing a game in the room turned a deaf ear to her scolding and calmly played his game. Lin Xiao slowly walked toward Yang Yan and stood coldly behind her. Then he reached out and grabbed her hair. Yang Yan's whole body suddenly flashed and disappeared. But the moment she disappeared, no one noticed. Because the man in the room didn't face Yang Yan at all. The man on the balcony only cared about playing with his gun. The little boy on the sofa was also wrapped in the quilt. The 5-year-old girl looked up at the place where Yang Yan disappeared in a daze. Mom. Hearing the little girl's cry, the man in the room thought it was just a bored child's cry. He didn't care, so he didn't look back. But the man on the balcony looked back because of the little girl's voice, but he didn't see Yang Yan. His first reaction was that Yang Yan might have gone to the room or the kitchen, so he didn't care and looked away. And at this moment, Yang Yan only felt that her hair was pulled, and the sofa under her but suddenly disappeared. Then she fell to the ground. But as soon as she sat down, she was shocked. When she looked up, the scene in front of her had changed. Her living room was gone, and the 2 children who were in front of her just now were also gone. In front of him was an unfamiliar forest. It was dark and eerie. What was more terrifying was that she was in her own house. Why did she suddenly appear here? Yang Yan turned her head to look around in panic, but when she turned her head, she was in despair. A badly mutilated zombie dog stood 1 meter behind her. Woo! A low growl came from the zombie dog's throat. This was the sound of a dog preparing to attack. Chapter 348. Tear her apart. Just as Yang Yan looked at the drooling zombie dog in horror, a hoarse and cold voice suddenly came. Roar! The zombie dog seemed to have received an order and suddenly threw Yang Yan under its paws. It opened its bloody mouth and began to bite. Ah, puff! Yang Yan screamed, and her head was crushed by the zombie dog's big mouth. Baji. The zombie dog bit off half of her head and directly chewed it in its mouth. Even the skull, skin, brain, and hair were chewed into pieces. Yang Yan's head above the nose was bitten off. Lin Xiao walked over and pulled it. I told you to tear her apart, not eat her. Okay, stop eating. Be careful not to eat this kind of person's stomach. She pulled the zombie dog away and wanted to get Yang Yan's body out. Baji. The zombie dog saw that Lin Xiao wanted to steal its food, so it chewed and made a low growl from its throat. Its paws tightly grabbed Yang Yan's body. Lin Xiao pulled a few times, but found that it refused to let go. Let go of me, you've bitten off her face. She didn't know if her family could recognize her. It wouldn't be fun if they couldn't. Let go of your paws. Lin Xiao pulled the rattan rope around its neck and dragged it back. Roar! Oh! The zombie dog didn't dare to attack Lin Xiao. Seeing that the food under its paws was about to be taken away, it fiercely swallowed the food in its mouth and instantly bit Yang Yan's shoulder. It directly tore off half of the arm and dragged it to the other side. It dragged the food in its mouth far away from Lin Xiao. Then it lay on the ground, pressed its paws on the arm and began to gnaw on it. Lin Xiao looked at Yang Yan, who had lost half of her head and an arm. Then, she glanced at the zombie dog that was chewing on the meat and staring at her vigilantly. She bent down and picked up Yang Yan's body, then flashed out of the space. It was still the same outside the house. No one noticed that Yang Yan was missing. Plop! A bloody corpse without half a head and an arm suddenly fell onto the coffee table in front of the sofa. At this moment, the little boy peeked out from under the blanket and saw this scene. What are you shouting for? The man in the room was so scared that he almost dropped the tablet in his hand. He turned his head and was about to curse. When he turned around, he immediately saw a naked corpse lying in front of him. When the child screamed, several ability users on the balcony, the roof, and outside the door immediately rushed in. However, when they saw the corpse lying on the coffee table, they fell silent. At the same time, they felt that they were going to be in big trouble. The little girl stared blankly at the corpse without any reaction. Soon, the door to Yang Chao's house was also opened. Yang Chao and Yang Hui rushed over. Who is this? Yang Chao stared at Yang Yan's corpse. Yang Hui looked at the familiar clothes on Yang Yan and murmured, "Could this be little Yan?" Yang Chao immediately looked up at the other people in the house and said with a cold voice, "What happened? Who did this? Jianfeng, tell me." After saying that, he turned his head and stared at the man who had been playing games. Jianfeng shook his head and waved his hands in panic. I don't know. I don't know anything. She was sitting here just now. How did she suddenly? I don't know what happened either." Yang Hui hurriedly walked over and picked up the little girl. He turned the child's head behind him, not letting her look in the direction of the corpse. At the same time, he shouted at Jianfeng, "Jianfeng, what are you waiting for? Go and pull De Bao away." Hearing his words, Jianfeng scrambled to his feet as if he had been granted amnesty. He ran to the little boy who had shrunk back into the blanket and picked him up along with the blanket. Then he walked far away. Yang Chao looked at the few metahumans he had sent to protect the family and asked in a low voice, "What do you have to say?" They all looked at each other, and the man who had been standing on the balcony said in a panic, We didn't feel anything. And we didn't notice any signs of anyone coming." The others nodded, but they didn't continue to speak. Now that the person had died under their protection, death was death. They had already failed in their duty, and there was no point in trying to defend themselves to Yang Chao. The other party only cared about the fact that they didn't protect the master well. In fact, in their hearts they were already waiting for death. They deserved to die for not protecting the family of the leader. Moreover, Yang Chao wasn't a soft-hearted person. On the contrary, he was a ruthless person. Sure enough, after they nodded, Yang Chao suddenly waved his hand. With a wave of his hand, the few level 5 metahumans were swept away by a small tornado. They directly rushed out of the balcony. A series of screams rang out. The 4 metahumans were trapped in his wind, and then there were constantly wind blades spinning around and cutting them. Bright red blood rain fell from the balcony of Yang Yan's house. Lin Xiao stood on the roof of the opposite building and watched their reaction. Then she turned around and directly jumped down from the building there. She went to where Lin Wenwen and the others lived. On the other side, after Shen Yuzhen left, she sniffed in the direction of Lin Xiao's scent. In the end, she found that she was in the inner area. There were many advanced metahumans in the inner area, so she didn't dare to go there. So, she could only turn around and sneak back to the neighborhood where she had attacked Pu Xuecang. Miss Lu had said that if she had nowhere else to go, she might go there and wait for her. When she reached the intersection of the neighborhood, she hid in a dark corner and waited. Not long after, someone suddenly appeared beside her. Lin Xiao had sensed Shen Yuzhen's scent from afar, so she only showed up when she was beside her. "Go in. You can't appear in the base now. Hide for a while." Shen Yuzhen knew what she meant. She had already been discovered. If she stayed in the base, it would be easy for her to get into trouble, and she might even implicate others. She nodded, indicating that she was willing to go into the space with her. Lin Xiao reached out to take her. Shen Yuzhen dodged, then took out an energy core in her hand. From the energy inside, it could be seen that it was a level 6 energy core. She handed the core to Lin Xiao. "Is it from the man just now?" Lin Xiao smelled the core. It was the same as the man Shen Yuzhen had bitten. Shen Yuzhen nodded, and then extended the core in her hand to her. For me. Lin Xiao looked at her with some surprise. Although Shen Yuzhen couldn't absorb this level 6 energy core for now, she could save it for later when the zombies' levels were higher. Shen Yuzhen nodded again, and then looked up at Lin Xiao with gratitude. Do you want to repay me with this? Forget it. I want a level 6 energy core, and I have the ability to get it now. You can keep this for yourself. Lin Xiao knew her intention and refused with a smile. Chapter 349. Shen Yuzhen shook her head and refused to accept Lin Xiao's refusal. Then he forcefully pulled her hand and stuffed the crystal core into her hand. Lin Xiao took the crystal core and shook her head. Actually, if you want to thank me, you can work for me in the future. This crystal core can help you improve your strength so you can help me do some things. Shen Yuzhen was stunned, then looked at her silently. Yes, she had become a zombie again, and her ability was not activated. Even if she wanted to help her, she might not be able to do anything big. Lin Xiao said to her, so if you want to help me, I'll just put it away and wait until I get out of this base. When we get out of this base, I will help you improve your zombie level. Then she returned the crystal core to her. This time, Shen Yuzhen did not insist on giving the core to her. After thinking about it, she realized that she was right. He could only put away the crystal core, then looked at her and nodded. Lin Xiao took her into the space, and then went back to Lin Wenwen's room. Because of Lu Tiany's announcement, Lin Wenwen's room was immediately strengthened. Lu Junjie and a few ordinary people took turns to guard the balcony. Du Yuanqing in the living room stared at Yuan Tianqing with disdain. What are you looking at me for? Didn't you say you want me to protect them? How can I protect them by myself? Isn't it better if we are together? Yuan Tianqing sat on the sofa on the other side, reading an unknown book. He glanced at him calmly and said. Du Yuanqing rolled his eyes and said, You alone are enough, why do you need us to join in? Yuan Tianqing said, Isn't it better to have more people? Du Yuanqing shrugged and said, Fine. You are the boss, you have the final say. Lin Wenwen in the bedroom frowned slightly. His face was deep in thought. What are you thinking about? Your eyebrows are almost knitted together. Long Qingying, who was sitting on the sofa, carefully wiped her katana with a piece of cloth. She looked at Lin Wenwen and asked. Lin Wenwen sighed and said, Maybe if I stay, I will really cause unnecessary trouble for Brother Tianqing. I am thinking that I am too willful to stay. But I'm very conflicted. I want to be closer to Brother Tianqing and see him. Long Qingying looked at her sharp blade and said, It's fine as long as you know how to be willful. From a bystander's point of view, if you really like him, you shouldn't cause trouble for him. You are now an older woman, not a 17 or 18-year-old girl who is easily impulsive. As she spoke, she placed the katana's blade in front of her eyes and carefully stared at the lines of the blade. She blew on the blade and continued, If you want to be with him, you have to look at the situation first. At a time like this, you should follow Lin Feng and the rest out. At least if he went there, it would be easier to deal with the zombies than the humans here. After all, we are outsiders. Do you think others will be polite to you? Just think about that kid and that woman and you should know. Lin Wenwen nodded. From that day on, she didn't dare to wear dresses anymore. She always wore jeans in the base. She originally thought that because of their cooperation with Wu Changyue, the people in the base would at least give them some face. But now she found that she was wrong. They only came to ask others to do things for them. It wasn't others who begged them to come. The status of the two was different. Because the situation was different, their treatment was also different. Under someone else's roof, they had to lower their heads. She could only blame herself for not learning to face their current situation. It was also because her elder sister protected them too well in the past. She was now in a struggle between reason and emotion. On one hand, she rationally told herself to leave Sea City Base as soon as possible, which was good for everyone. On the other hand, she didn't want to leave Yuan Tianqing. Although she couldn't get his emotional response, it was good to be close to him. If only her elder sister was here. Her elder sister would definitely criticize her severely, and then kick her out. She wouldn't let herself be tangled and troubled here. She needed someone to take care of herself. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to take care of herself. But her elder sister, thinking of Lin Xiao, Lin Wenwen felt sad. But soon she suddenly thought of that female zombie Lu Tianyu. She didn't know why, but the longer they got along, the more she saw the shadow of her elder sister in the other party, as well as those handwriting, the tone of voice, and the occasional small movements. There was also that familiar temperament, that inexplicable sense of familiarity. Sometimes, Lin Wenwen would wonder why this Lu Tianyu would specially come to help them. "Qingqing, do you think my elder sister is really dead?" she suddenly asked Long Qingying in a daze. Long Qingying looked up at her strangely and asked, "What do you mean?" "I think the leader is very powerful. She might not really be dead. Even if she was defeated, the possibility of her escaping is very high. In fact, I never believed that she was dead. Maybe she will come back in the future." Lin Wenwen said suspiciously, "Then if she is not dead, has she come back?" Long Qingying didn't care very much and replied, "Maybe." At this time in Wu Qingyue's house, Xiao Yunlong's car had just driven into the house. Xiao Yunlong opened the door and got out of the car. As soon as he entered the living room, he saw Wu Changyue and Meng Yu sitting in the living room. They seemed to be talking about preparing to go out of the base to collect supplies. "You're back? Why are you so late? Have you eaten yet?" Wu Changyue looked up at him and asked. Xiao Yunlong said, "I haven't eaten yet. I came back after seeing their next arrangements." Wu Changyue immediately asked, "Have they decided on the location? Are they ready to start construction?" Xiao Yunlong shook his head and said, "They haven't started yet, but the place seems to have been decided. They plan to build the wall in the inner area first. It is estimated that they will wait for Yuan Tianqing here before they can officially start construction." Wu Changyue seemed to have expected it and nodded, saying, "I think so too." At this time, Xiao Liqing suddenly ran in and said to the crowd leader, "Something happened in the research room. Dr. Liang was killed." "What did you say?" Wu Changyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at him in surprise. Xiao Liqing said, "The news just came." Wu Changyue immediately stood up and threw the information in his hand on the table. Then without saying anything he went straight out. Xiao Liqing quickly helped him pick up his coat and went out with Xiao Yunlong. Meng Yu also stood up from the sofa, but she just watched the others leave and did not follow them out. Chapter 350. On the other side, Lin Xiao had just walked into the building when she felt someone following her. She turned around and saw a man and a woman walking into the staircase. "Big Sister Yan, you could have just sent us to inform the people in the Netherworld King's base. Why did you come here personally?" The young man following behind the tall beauty said to the beauty in front of him. Yan Fengyu walked in front and said, "I came when I wanted to. I was afraid you didn't make things clear." The young man was speechless. "It's just a piece of news. What else can we talk about? What do you mean we didn't make things clear? It's clearly you who wants to see the handsome deputy leader." Yan Fengyu turned around and glanced at him. "It's good that you know. There's no need to say it out loud." The young man. "Big sister, you could have taken a liking to anyone. Why did you take a liking to an outsider? There are so many good men in our base. You're making our men despair." As Yan Fengyu walked, she turned around and rolled her eyes at him, saying, "It's my business who I like, even if I don't like outsiders. Even if I don't take a liking to outsiders, I won't take a liking to the people in our base." "Why?" The young man didn't understand. Yan Fengyu said, "There's no reason. Maybe love hasn't come yet." With that, she winked at the young man. Lin Xiao was about to reveal herself when she saw the two of them walking up. She could only continue to hide and wait for them to come up. Then she followed behind. Who was this woman? She actually took a liking to her Tianqing. She had already decided to leave him for her sister to be her brother-in-law. She followed the two to Lin Wenwen's room and saw Wei Jingchen and Xinglu standing at the door opposite theirs. Why are you guarding here? Is it to protect Miss Lin?" Yan Fengyu asked them curiously. "Hello, Miss Yan. Are you here to find our deputy leader?" Xinglu and Du Yuanqing nodded at them. Yan Fengyu smiled and nodded. "Yes. I'm here to find him." "Wait a moment." Wei Jingchen turned around and knocked on the door before opening it. He shouted towards the living room. "Boss, Deputy Leader Yan is here to find you." Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing were stunned. Then they looked at each other. "Why is she here?" Du Yuanqing shrugged and said, "Ask her." Yuan Tianxing said to the door. Invite her in. Then, Yin Fengyu walked in with one of her subordinates. Yin Fengyu smiled at him and said, Good evening, Deputy Leader Yuan. Yuan Tianxing stood up and gestured to the sofa with a polite smile. I told you not to call me Deputy Leader. I'm no longer Deputy Leader. Please take a seat. What brings you here so late at night? Yin Fengyu sat down alone. Her subordinate stood 1 meter behind her. Du Yuanxing turned around to pour her a glass of water and put it in front of her. Yin Fengyu said, Oh, I'm advising you to be careful, especially since there are 2 girls here. They are now being targeted by one of the 3 leaders of this base. I think even if you want to take them away now, you won't be able to. Probably wouldn't be that easy. Also, you may be in trouble yourself, so it's better to be vigilant. Yuan Tianxing smiled faintly and said, Oh, if you're saying that Yang Chao has his eyes on our Lin Wenwen, then we already know about this. And we plan to leave as soon as possible. Yin Fengyu looked at him in surprise. Huh? How did you know so quickly? Not many people know about this. It can't be that someone told you about it, right? Yuan Tianxing smiled meaningfully at her and said, You're right. Someone did come before you. But I didn't expect you to come, and it's already very late. Yin Fengyu didn't care about what he said. She still smiled confidently. Oh, are you blaming me for thinking too much? You don't appreciate my kindness for coming to inform you so late at night? Yuan Tianxing shook his head and said, Why would I? I don't have such words. Right at this moment, Lin Wenwen opened the door slightly and asked Long Qingying with a surprised expression. Qingqing, who is the woman outside? Long Qingying put the towel she used to wipe her on the table and put the knife back into its sheath. Then she put it on the chair, stood up and walked to the door. She looked out from behind Lin Wenwen. I don't know. But I can see the way she's looking at the deputy leader. It seems that your love rival has appeared. Lin Wenwen's eyes were a little unreadable. She nodded. Yes, I feel it. The 2 of them closed the door slightly and silently listened to the conversation outside. They found that the purpose of the beautiful woman was the same as that of Lu Tianyi. Long Qingying frowned and said, There are a lot of nosy people tonight. This woman is obviously here for the deputy leader. Then who are those men coming for? Lin Wenwen suddenly had a flash of inspiration when she asked this question. She looked back at Long Qingying and asked, that man seems to be called Lu Tianyi, and Sister Lu seems to be called Lu Tianyu. Now that you mention it, why do I suddenly feel like there's something going on between them? Long Qingying also looked at her with a slight surprise. Yin Fengyu didn't stay any longer. She knew that someone had come before them to inform them. She casually chatted with Yuan Tianxing for a while before leaving with her men on her 10-centimeter high-heel shoes. Don't think that it's hard for her to walk in such high heels. Of all the women in the base, only this great beauty Yen walked outside every day with her hate the scythe shoes. And she walked steadily and neatly, without a sense of cautiousness at all. Of course, if you bullied her because she was wearing high heels, who would be the unlucky one then? After Yin Fengyu's beautiful figure left, Lin Wenwen and Yuan Tianxing came out of the bedroom. Who was that beauty just now? She sat on the sofa and asked curiously. Yuan Tianxing replied, Oh, one of the deputy leaders here. Lin Wenwen was a little surprised. She's the deputy leader? No wonder she's so imposing. She's a high-ranking official. But she's so beautiful. There must be a lot of men chasing after her. And they must not be simple men. Du Yuanxing immediately became interested and said to her, Yes, that's right. I heard that the men chasing after her in this base are lining up outside the gate of the base. She's the goddess of this base. And she's unclaimed. Long Qingying said indifferently, You're drooling. Du Yuanxing glanced at her with a smirk and said, Hee, are you jealous? Long Qingying rolled her eyes at him and said, You're crazy, what's there to be jealous of? So what if there are many people chasing after her? In the end, she will only belong to one man. At this time Lin Wenwen was thinking of a question. What was the relationship between Lu Tianyu and Lu Tianyi? By the way, Lu Tianyu was originally from the sea, but why didn't she seem to have returned home? Did anyone in this base know her? Chapter 351. So she's the woman who brought you trouble. Suddenly a familiar hoarse voice sounded. Yuan Tianxing, Du Yuanxing, Lin Wenwen, And Long Qingying looked in the direction of the voice at the same time, and saw a woman wearing a hat and sunglasses standing there without them noticing. Lin Xiao took off her sunglasses, revealing a pair of dark eyes with a hint of green in the middle. Lin Wenwen saw her and said happily, "Hey Sister Lu, you're back?" Lin Xiao smiled at her and nodded. The smile on Yuan Tianqing's handsome face became much more genuine and he said, "That's great, we can leave soon." Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "I'm afraid we can't leave for a while." Her words stunned the others, and they all looked at her in confusion. "Why?" Lin Wenwen asked. Lin Xiao said, "Because a few people died tonight, the base will soon be in chaos. It won't be long, people will probably come tomorrow at dawn." Lin Wenwen exchanged glances with the others in surprise. Yuan Tianqing's eyes flashed and he asked, "You seem to know who died?" Lin Xiao smiled faintly and said, "Of course, a deputy leader, a leader's sister, and a researcher studying the zombie virus died. What do you think?" As she spoke, she walked to the window and leaned against it, carefully looking outside. Yuan Tianqing and the rest's expressions changed slightly, and they stared at her in bewilderment. How could they die? And you shouldn't have appeared at this time. Lin Wenwen suddenly frowned and said. Yuan Tianqing's face also darkened and he quickly walked to the window and closed the curtains. When one is right, you appearing at this time is a great opportunity. You appearing at this time will only make Yang Chao suspect you. Moreover, why did those people suddenly die? Also, Yang Chao's family should have been well protected by him. Who in the base would dare to do anything to her without any scruples? Lin Xiao said faintly, "Because I was the one who did it, of course I have no scruples." When Lin Wenwen heard that Yang Yan was dead, he was secretly happy. But when he heard that Lin Xiao was the one who did it, Lin Wenwen looked at her in shock like everyone else. Suddenly, he didn't know what to say. Du Yuanqing stared at Lin Xiao as if he had seen a ghost and said, "Big sister, you're causing trouble." "That's exactly what I want to do," Lin Xiao said with a mischievous smile. Then he shrugged and said nonchalantly, "Don't worry. Someone will use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chao soon. He doesn't have time for us." "Who?" everyone asked in unison. Lin Xiao said, "Who is his enemy?" "Wu Chengwei." The crowd answered again. Lin Wenwen and Yuan Tianqing were quick-witted and immediately understood what Lin Xiao was trying to say. Could it be that the person who died was one of Leader Wu's men? "So do you think he'll use this opportunity to retaliate against Yang Chao?" she said with her eyes slightly widened. Lin Xiao smiled and gave her a meaningful look. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, "I wouldn't let go of this opportunity if I were Wu Chengwei. Perhaps Leader Wu still has something that he hasn't revealed yet." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "He's the leader of a base after all. Even if there's no opportunity, he'll create one himself." At this moment, Lin Wenwen suddenly looked at Lin Xiao and asked, "Hey, you just said the woman who brought you trouble. Are you referring to that woman just now? Who did she bring trouble to?" Lin Xiao pointed at Yuan Tianqing and said, "Him. Or should I say he's the one who got into trouble. Do you know that Yang Chao is so jealous that he wants to kill him because that woman has been getting close to him recently? He found a group of robbers and was prepared to kill him when he left the base. I don't know where Yang Chao found these level 7 robbers, but he's not afraid of being bitten in the back." As soon as she finished speaking, the other 3 people in the room stared at Yuan Tianqing's eyes in silence. Yuan Tianqing, who got into trouble, said, "What does this have to do with me? I'm just an innocent bystander, okay?" Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. He looked at Lin Xiao and said, "Oh, right. I almost remembered that there's something about you." Lin Xiao looked at him curiously as he walked out of the room and seemed to go to the opposite room. After a few minutes, he came back with a small box in his hand. "Wu Chengwei gave this to you." Yuan Tianqing handed the box to her. "He gave it to you? What is it?" Lin Xiao asked. Yuan Tianqing stuffed the box into her hand and said, "Oh, I think it's a pair of contact lenses." Lin Xiao looked at him in surprise and asked curiously, "Why would he find this kind of glasses for me?" Yuan Tianqing spread his hands and said, "How would I know? You'll have to ask him yourself." Lin Xiao opened the box in her hand in confusion and found that the transparent glasses inside were perfectly preserved and didn't look broken. After Yang Chao dealt with Yang Yan's death, he immediately sent people to search the entire base. Yang Yan's wound seemed to be bite marks from a beast, but there's a serious zombie virus on it. If her brain wasn't bitten off, she would have become a zombie by now. Everyone searched the base. Not only did zombies sneak into the base, but even zombie beasts have sneaked in. Yang Chao stood in the living room of his apartment, his face gloomy and cold. An invisible pressure filled the room, making the breathing of the group of people in front of them slow down. What are you standing there for? All of you go. Now. Immediately. Seeing that these people's reactions were a beat slower after he gave the mission, Yang Chao immediately shouted. Yes. Most of the people immediately responded, then turned around to leave. You two stay, the rest go out. Yang Chao suddenly pointed at two people and told them to stay, then said to them, go and call the virus research team 1 in the research institute over. Yes. Soon, only Yang Chao was left in the room, and Tang He walked out from the inside. Could these zombies have escaped from your research institute? He asked suspiciously. Yang Chao looked at him and said, the only place in the base with zombies is the research institute. If zombies have escaped, then it must have come from there. Liang Dashu is dead, and the woman beside him is missing. His important information might have been taken away. That's right, you were seen by that woman. It's best to hide yourself and not be discovered by Wu Changyue. Otherwise, we'll both be in trouble. Tang He said with an indifferent expression, even if you didn't say it, I would still hide. But the information you said is that there's a way to alleviate the virus, is that true? Chapter 352. Yang Chao glanced at him and said, we're on the same boat now, I don't need to lie to you. Also, this was supposed to be kept a secret. Letting you know already shows that I value our cooperation. What are you still doubting? Tang He said. Then do you have a way to get Wu Changyue off the stage? Yang Chao looked at him and said, I was going to ask you to capture the woman from Hades King's base and turn her into a zombie. That way, I would have a reason to expel her from the base, but you haven't helped me capture her yet. Tang He looked at him deeply, then shrugged and nodded. Okay. You just want to capture someone from Hades' base, it doesn't matter who it is. So even if you don't capture that woman, you can capture someone else. I'll go now, you should hurry and solve the problem of your research institute. He also knew that the research institute was managed by Yang Chao, although it was built by the cooperation of the 3 leaders. Now that it was his people who were in charge, the first problem was that he didn't manage it properly. In addition, his sister was suddenly killed by a zombie in his own home. This was obviously revenge. Yang Chao must be very sad and angry, just look at his cold face. When Tang He was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He turned around and looked at Yang Chao and said, oh right, I saw the zombie that bit your subordinate, it was a female zombie. But there's something strange. He paused and said with a confused and conflicted expression, there were a lot of people at the scene, but the female zombie only attacked your subordinate. She turned a blind eye to the others. What's going on? Yang Chao's expression froze for a moment. Then he looked at him and asked, what did you say? Will that zombie choose someone to attack? Tang He nodded and said, it seems like it. I don't know what level it is. Yang Chao frowned and continued to look at him and asked, you can't feel its level? What does it look like? Tang He shook his head and said, I can't see what it looks like, but with long hair it's definitely a female zombie. Yang Chao became silent and frowned, not knowing what he was thinking. Tang He then turned around and left. Not long after, the 2 subordinates that Yang Chao sent to find the research team suddenly ran back in a hurry. Leader, this is bad. Everyone from Research Group 1 is gone. Yang Chao's expression immediately changed. He looked at his 2 subordinates in surprise. What? How could he disappear? Where did he go? The 2 men replied with sweat on their foreheads. When we arrived, the house was already empty. I asked the neighbors, but they said they didn't see them go back. Yang Chao's expression quickly regained its composure, but it also darkened. Send more people to search. Yes. On this side, Yang Chao was a little flustered because of the disappearance of his researchers. On the other side, Wu Changyue brought everyone to the destroyed laboratory of the research institute and looked at the mess. There were also 2 corpses inside. After Xiao Liqin quickly checked the scene with his white gloves, he turned around and reported to Wu Changyue, Leader, Pu Krokang's crystal core has been taken. Then he continued, moreover, he has a strong zombie virus in his body. There are bite marks on his arm, so he must have been bitten by a zombie. Wu Chongyue listened to his words without any expression on his face. He quietly looked at Liang Dashu's body a few times, then said, "Take good care of Dr. Liang's funeral. Also, keep an eye on those researchers. Don't let Yang Chao find out where they are." Another captain next to him immediately nodded and said, "Yes. You guys, carry out the doctor's body first." Wu Chongyue walked behind Xiao Liqing, who was squatting on the ground, looked at Pu Krokang's body in front of him and said, "The head cover has been removed, so of course the target is the crystal core. But how did he get bitten by zombies? Could it be that one of these escaped?" As he spoke, he turned to look at the rows of zombie glass boxes outside the laboratory. Xiao Yunlong shook his head and said, "I just checked, no zombies are missing. It shouldn't be here." Wu Chongyue said strangely, "Then where did the zombies come from?" He thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at Xiao Yunlong and said, "Could it be that she came back here? Didn't you say she left before you?" Xiao Yunlong nodded in agreement and said, "It's possible. But she said she seemed to have something on the way, and might be delayed. Anyway, even if she came back we wouldn't know. She is used to being invisible." Leader, this Pu Krokang was bitten in the residential area of D area, and then ran all the way here. Although I don't know why he ran here. He just happened to meet Dr. Liang. Or did he come here specifically to find the doctor? Xiao Liqing stood up from the ground, looked away from Pu Krokang's body, and looked at Wu Chongyue. Wu Chongyue's eyes flashed, nodded and said, "It should be possible. But why did she let the zombies bite Pu Krokang?" Just as he was feeling puzzled, a soldier suddenly ran in from outside. Then he said something to their captain's ear, and then he saw the captain's expression become slightly dignified. "Leader." The captain immediately turned to Wu Chongyue and said, "Yang Yan just died, and her death was very tragic." Yang Chao, in a rage, strangled the paranormals who protected Yang Yan with the wind. Wu Chongyue and the others looked at him in surprise. "She died? How tragic." The captain said, "Her head and one of her shoulders and arms were bitten off. It seems to have been bitten by a mourning dog. And Yang Chao didn't even find the shadow of the murderer. Now a large number of people have begun to search the base. A head and an arm, so tragic. It must be revenge. Needless to say, to be able to come and go without a trace and kill people like this. It must be that guy. There's even a zombie beast. She wouldn't have kept a zombie dog as a pet, right?" Wu Chongyue thought for a moment and guessed who had the ability to do so. And this Yang Yan offended Lin Wenwen not long ago. I don't know if she killed her because of Lin Wenwen. Maybe her goal is the same as ours, to kill Yang Chao. But this thing. As he spoke, he suddenly had a headache and continued, "Can't she just be a good zombie? Why did she come here to cause trouble? Although it was Yang Chao who caused trouble, it created an opportunity for us. But if she continues to cause trouble like this, our base will be in a mess. I have this premonition." This time Xiao Yunlong, Xiao Liqing, and the others all knew who he was referring to. Thinking about that female zombie's style of doing things and strength, everyone was silent for a moment, inexplicably having a feeling of foreboding a storm. Why did it feel like someone was going to cause trouble? Chapter 353. That night, the soldiers in the base began to check the houses one by one. All the districts were in a state of unrest. Everyone was in a state of anxiety and could not sleep well that night. However, Yang Chao sent people to search for a whole night, but they didn't find any suspicious people. Emily hid in a dark corner and watched the soldiers walk back and forth. She hid by a wall and watched a small group of soldiers walk past. He followed them silently, and when they turned a corner, he suddenly covered the mouth of the last male soldier, strangling his neck and dragging him back. The male soldier didn't react and was dragged into the corner. She just said coldly, "Go to sleep. There's no need to check anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, the male soldier's eyes began to sink and then he really fell asleep. He didn't know what he was doing at all. Emily carefully observed the surroundings and did not find anything suspicious. She immediately took off the soldier's clothes and put them on herself. After putting on the clothes and hat, she stood up. Then her body suddenly began to grow taller and her face also changed. Soon she became exactly the same as the soldier just now. She quickly ran out with the rifle and caught up with the group of soldiers. "Hurry up, where did you go?" The team leader in front seemed to notice that one person was missing. He turned around and saw Emily following him. Emily said, "I had to pee just now." Right now, she had the appearance of a man, and her voice was also that of a man. No one would be able to recognize her as she was. In fact, she didn't want to follow the team, but now the search teams in the base were working in small groups. It would be very suspicious if she suddenly moved alone. So she followed these people for a while and then left the team. Then she followed another team or hid in a dark corner, and stealthily went in the direction of Wu Chengyue's house. In the end, when she ran to Wu Chengyue's house, she only saw Mengyu alone. "Who is it?" Mengyu looked at the male soldier who suddenly opened the door and shouted. This was the residence of the leader. Ordinary soldiers wouldn't come in without orders. And it was a soldier she didn't know. "It's me." However, when the male soldier opened his mouth, a woman's voice came. Then, Mengyu saw the male soldier's face suddenly distort, and even his body shrank a little. When Mengyu saw Emily's face, she immediately walked out. "Why are you here? Did those people do anything to you? What's wrong with Dr. Liang?" When Emily heard her mention Dr. Liang, her face immediately darkened. He said sorrowfully, "It's Puzhetsang. I don't know where he was bitten by zombies, but he suddenly ran into our lab. He insisted on asking the doctor for the antidote for the virus. But suddenly, an unfamiliar level 7 arcanist appeared and killed Pu Qiakang. When he tried to attack us, the doctor threw the bomb at him. So the doctor, he sacrificed himself to protect me." Mengyu's face immediately became solemn. "What? A rank 7 arcanist? Are you sure?" Emily said. Pu Croang was instantly killed by him. He didn't even have the chance to fight back. Also, I felt the pressure of his ability, which was similar to the leader's. If he's not level 7, then he should be only one step away from it. Mengyu said with a sullen face, "There's a 4th level 7 arcanist hidden in our base. Who is this person? What does he want to do?" "I don't know. But it's true that he came with bad intentions." Emily shook her head and then asked anxiously, "Where did the leader go?" "I still have something to report," Mengyu said. "He went to the research institute where the accident happened. I don't think he'll be back so soon. And after this incident, the leader may do something big to Yang Chao. You wait here for him to come back." In the end, they waited until dawn. The next day at dawn, all the important officials of Haiqing base went to a meeting. There were soldiers everywhere in the base and there was a sentry every 3 to 5 steps. Lin Wenwen looked left and right in the room early in the morning. When she didn't see Lin Chao, she asked, "Hey, where did Sister Lu go?" The others looked at her and shook their heads. "I don't know." Lin Wenwen rolled her eyes, then said with a smile, "Well, I'm going out today." When she said that, everyone immediately looked at her in confusion. "You're going out? Look at the situation now. Where are you going? Don't run around. What if something happens?" Yuan Tianqing frowned slightly and said to her. The others nodded in agreement. Lin Wenwen walked in front of Yuan Tianqing and said, "Brother Tianqing, I have a question to ask you. My sister didn't die and came back one day, but her appearance and identity have changed. What would you do?" Yuan Tianqing looked at her expression and was stunned for a moment, then looked at her in silence. On his handsome face, the pair of eyes that usually had a smile on them were as calm as a lake. After more than 10 seconds, he looked at Lin Wenwen and said slowly, "No matter what she becomes, she's still my boss. Our team only recognizes her soul, not her appearance." Lin Wenwen's eyes darkened slightly and a ray of tears flashed. She lowered her eyes and then opened them again. Lin Wenwen, who opened her eyes again, said calmly, "Me too. So now I want to go out and find out something. No matter what danger there is, they can't stop me." Yuan Tianqing looked at her curiously. "Where do you want to go?" Lin Wenwen pondered and said, "I don't know. But it shouldn't be too far." Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing looked at each other and didn't understand why Lin Wenwen would do this. Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianqing with an unfathomable gaze and said, "Brother Tianqing, someone is hiding something from us. Then we'll have to figure it out ourselves. Also, that Yang Chao shouldn't have time to care about me today." Yuan Tianqing asked, what do you want to find out? What does this have to do with your sister? Lin Wenwen said, whether it has anything to do with me or not depends on the outcome. She turned and walked towards the door. Qingqing, let's go. Long Qingying carried her katana and followed her out. Yuan Tianqing said to Du Yuanqing, Yuanqing, you go with her. Wenwen is right because the big shots in the base don't have time to care about outsiders like us, so it's relatively safer for her to go out now. With you and Qingqing around, be more vigilant. Even if there is a situation, we should be able to deal with it. Du Yuanqing looked at him, then nodded and stood up. Got it. With that, he walked towards the door and followed Lin Wenwen downstairs. Chapter 354. Du Yuanqing ran up to the two girls and asked, what do you want to investigate? Lin Wenwen walked in front and didn't answer him. Instead, she asked, Du Yuanqing, do you know Sister Lu's interpersonal relationships in this base? Du Yuanqing was stunned and stopped. He asked in surprise, huh? You want to ask about Miss Lu? Long Qingying also looked at her. Then what you said just now, does Miss Lu have anything to do with the leader? Lin Wenwen nodded and said hesitantly, I have some ideas and guesses, but I need to confirm them. Long Qingying said strangely, then can't you just ask her? Why do you have to ask behind her back? Lin Wenwen shook his head and said, she definitely won't say it. If she will say it. If she would, she wouldn't use this identity to get close to us. Long Qingying and Du Yuanqing looked at each other blankly, not quite understanding what Lin Wenwen meant. What identity? Does she have another identity? Long Qingying suddenly looked around and said with a strange expression, do you think she's actually following us? She always suddenly appears and then disappears. And now we're talking about her. Lin Wenwen said calmly, no, I think she's probably going to watch the big shots at the base now. If it's her, she likes to do this kind of thing. Isn't Leader Wu going to cause trouble? Long Qingying and Du Yuanqing looked at her in confusion. How do you know? Lin Wenwen shrugged and said, I guessed. Then she turned around and was about to continue walking down. At this time, Du Yuanqing finally couldn't help but say, well, if you just want to ask about Miss Lu, I actually know everything. If you really want to know about her, you don't have to ask about her. Lin Wenwen stopped and looked back at him in surprise. You know? Really? Du Yuanqing nodded and said, actually, she's quite famous. Lin Wenwen suddenly rushed forward and grabbed him, then walked down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped and looked around, then pulled him to the window in the corner. Then why didn't you say so earlier? Who is she? What did you find out? Long Qingying walked down and stood beside her, also looking at Du Yuanqing curiously. Du Yuanqing looked around and after confirming that there was no one around, he said, she's quite famous. But he has a bad reputation. Lin Wenwen asked curiously, why? Is there a reason? Du Yuanqing said, I heard that she used to be an ordinary woman who relied on her beauty and body to survive under men. Furthermore, she was a woman who loved vanity, had evil intentions, and loved to do evil. After she became Yang Chao's lover, she used her identity as the leader's lover. He had done a lot of bad things in this base, offended a lot of people, and caused a lot of trouble for Yang Chao. So after Yang Chao got tired of her, he probably thought that she was too old and kicked her out. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying looked at each other in surprise. They didn't expect Miss Lu to be such a person. How could that be? Based on what you said, this woman should be the kind of person who is very annoying. But now I feel that Miss Lu is quite a nice person. She doesn't have that kind of feeling, Long Qingying said with a puzzled look. Du Yuanqing nodded repeatedly and said in agreement, yes. When the deputy leader and I found out, we were also very surprised and couldn't believe it. We even thought that the person we found out was actually someone else. Not her. Lin Wenwen's expression was a little thoughtful. She thought for a moment and then said, according to what you said, then she is like a different person from before, right? Du Yuanqing nodded and said, yes, before and after she was like two different people. I heard that when she died it was because she liked Leader Wu. Then Yang Chao sent people to instigate her to kidnap Leader Wu's little princess. I don't know what method she used, but she really did kidnap the little princess. Long Qingying and Lin Wenwen both had a strange expression on their faces. She really wanted to die. Could it be that she used space to take the little princess away? Long Qingying guessed doubtfully. Du Yuanxing shook his head and said no, she was an ordinary person before and had no abilities. If she was a space ability user, then she wouldn't need to rely on her body and face to survive. Long Qingying nodded and said, that's true. Du Yuanxing continued to say, you guys can't imagine what she did after that. I heard that she raped Leader Wu and was killed by Leader Wu outside. That's why she became a zombie. As he said the last part, his voice became smaller and he looked around with a strange expression. Wait. What did you just say? Lin Wenwen had a confused look and quickly interrupted him. What? What do you mean by she raped Wu Changyue? Long Qingying also slightly widened her eyes and stared at Du Yuanxing, a strange expression on her face. Du Yuanxing quickly made a shushing gesture to Lin Wen. Don't be so loud. This matter is actually known by many people here. But for the sake of Leader Wu's face, don't talk nonsense. Lin Wenwen didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, so, she actually caused her own death? Speaking of which, did Leader Wu really kill her? Is he that kind of person? Although he was raped, but he wouldn't hate her so much that he killed her, right? Du Yuanxing said, and there seems to be some inside story to this matter. We didn't ask too much, afraid that it would make Leader Wu angry. And now everyone can see, the little princess is also safe and sound at home. So, we don't think he would really kill Miss Lu. Long Qingying said expressionlessly, that's not necessarily true. Rape doesn't discriminate between men and women. You can't forgive her just because she's a woman. Who told her to rape a man from a good family? Why do I feel like laughing when I hear you say that? Du Yuanxing looked at her with amusement. Lin Wenwen nodded and said, that's true. Then Long Qingying suddenly said, then hearing what you said, doesn't that mean that she and Wu Changyue are enemies? Then why does it seem like nothing happened between the two of them? If Wu Changyue saw that she was the woman who kidnapped his daughter and raped her, how could she still cooperate with them peacefully like this? Du Yuanxing replied, oh, maybe it's because her appearance is too different from now. I think that Wu Changyue doesn't seem to recognize her yet. I heard that she used to wear a lot of makeup on her face, and even in the Valkyrie, she would wear a short skirt that only covered her buttocks, revealing a pair of white legs and high-heel shoes. She was a woman who loved to dress up. But compared to her appearance now, maybe they really are two different people. And maybe other than Wu Changyue, no one else recognized her. Chapter 355. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying imagined the scene of Lu Tianyu swaying around in front of them in a miniskirt with heavy makeup on her face, and then having fun under the man's body with a rippling expression. They couldn't help but shake their heads, feeling that something strange had gotten into her mind. Du Yuanxing asked her, do you still want to go out and ask around? Lin Wenwen shook her head and said, you've already said it. Why should I go out? I'd better go back. I already know the answer I want. Du Yuanxing and Long Qingying looked at her strangely. What answer? Lin Wenwen smiled mysteriously and said, you'll know soon enough. Let's go back. Yuan Tianqing, who was standing by the window and ready to watch Lin Wenwen and the others walk out of the neighborhood, was pushed open before he could see them. Yuan Tianqing turned his head and saw that the three people who had left for less than 10 minutes had come back. He asked in surprise, Didn't you go out? Why are you back? Lin Wenwen smiled and said, I'm not going. Then she went back into the house, leaving Yuan Tianqing looking at the other two people in confusion. Long Qingying, who had returned to the house, closed the door and looked at Lin Wenwen strangely. Why do you want to ask about Miss Lu? And you just mentioned the leader of the Netherfire to the deputy leader. Does this have anything to do with her? Did you find something? Lin Wenwen leaned against the bedroom window and looked up at the clouds outside. She had a relaxed smile on her face, as if she had let go of something in her heart. Hearing Long Qingying's words, Lin Wenwen turned back and smiled at her. She said, maybe there is. Maybe you'll know when the time comes. She didn't say what she had confirmed. Long Qingying didn't care that she didn't want to say it. She said with a strange expression, I didn't expect Miss Lu to be such a person. She's completely different from the person Du Yuanxing described. Could there be a mistake? Lin Wenwen looked back at her and said, there should be no mistake. If he could make a mistake about these things, Du Yuanxing doesn't deserve to live in this world. Long Qingying thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. But did Miss Lu really do those things before? Lin Wenwen looked at her. Maybe. Because that was her in the past, not the current her. Lin Wenwen thought. After a person dies, he becomes a zombie and wakes up, but he becomes a zombie with memories and soul. Moreover, his personality, temper, and behavior were all different from before. He was like a different person. If it wasn't an act, it meant that she might have become another person. There were many ways for a person to become another person. It could be to pretend for a long time and then forget or hide one's true nature. They could also be influenced by others, such as stimulation or hypnosis to become another person. The third type was the soul, which had already become another soul. Even zombies could speak. What else was impossible? However, Lin Wenwen only believed in the last one. That was, Lu Tianyu's soul had now become her sister Lin Xiao's. Otherwise, how could he explain why she, an outsider, needed to come all the way to save them and help them? Now they were using the excuse of cooperation to build a new base for them, and let those high-level zombies protect them. Moreover, no one could have the same temperament, the same habits, and the same way of speaking as her sister. Lin Wenwen now only felt that her sister had returned. If it was only a vague suspicion before, then now after hearing Du Yuanxing's words, she had confirmed it. Suddenly, Long Qingying looked at her strangely. Why are you crying? Lin Wenwen came back to her senses and wiped her face, only to find that it was a little wet. It's nothing, I just thought of something. She wiped her face and said with a smile. Long Qingying looked at her suspiciously. Lin Wenwen's entire temperament seemed to calm down. She smiled softly and said, Why are you looking at me? I'm thinking if we should leave. I wonder if Sister Lu has finished watching the show. Long Qingying said, Where are we going? Lin Wenwen said, To our own territory. This is someone else's territory. I can't feel at ease staying here all day long. Long Qingying looked at her and nodded. She said, Then you should stay here and don't go anywhere else. Lin Wenwen looked at her and said, I don't plan to go anywhere else. Long Qingying nodded. That's good. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who was told by Lin Wenwen to go watch the show, was currently in a large conference hall in the inner district of the government building. The tables in the conference hall were arranged in a door shape, arranged in 3 layers, and the 3 positions were obviously occupied by 3 groups of people. In the middle was Wu Changyue, and beside him were Xiao Yunlong, Mengyu, Mo Li, Xiao Liqing and other subordinates, all sitting behind him. On the left was Yang Chao, and beside him was another level 6 deputy leader. But there was one less person on his left, and the seat was empty. On the right was Zhou Shihui, who looked about the same age as Wu Changyue. He was slightly older than him, and belonged to the middle of the 3 leaders. Wu Changyue was the youngest, but his strength was the strongest. Behind him was a level 6 deputy leader, as well as the deputy leader Chen Yuding. Mengyu Mo Li, Xiao Liqing and other level 5 ability users numbered more than 20. In terms of military strength, Yang Chao and Zhou Shihui were no match for him. In contrast, Yang Chao had 2 rank 6 metahumans, but the deceased Pu Crowing was not a capable subordinate. Moreover, he had courted death himself. Now Yang Chao only had 1 rank 6 metahuman as his subordinate. There were not many level 5 ability users less than 10. On the other side of Zhou Shihui, there was an old man and a woman, 2 level 6 ability users. Needless to say, the woman was the goddess of this base, Yin Fangyu. The other level 6 arcanist was an old man with white hair and a wrinkled face. He wore a pair of thick reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming were sitting behind Zhou Shihui, and Kong Qingming was wearing a green military uniform. Lu Tianyi's uniform was not a military uniform, but a white researcher's robe. The leaders and deputy leaders here all wore black military uniforms, and only other ability users below level 5 wore green military uniforms or other professional uniforms. The people of the 3 parties, whether it was ability managers or technical personnel, were all sitting in the conference hall. They were all sitting in the conference hall. Most of them added up to 40 or 50 people. At this time, the atmosphere in the hall was somewhat depressing, except for a few big shots. The people behind just quietly bowed their heads, not daring to breathe too loudly. On the other hand, the people on Yang Chao's side all looked a little guilty and flustered. Chapter 356. Only Yang Chao sat there calmly with his arms crossed, as if nothing had happened to him. It was as if he had already made up his mind about something and didn't care about what others thought. Zhou Shihui was a man who wasn't handsome, but he wasn't ugly either. At first glance there wasn't anything special about him, but after a few more glances one would find that he was actually quite pleasing to the eye. Moreover, he had a calm and steady temperament, which was a temperament unique to mature men. His eyes were calm, but it was as if he could see through a lot of things. He looked at Yang Chao and then at Wu Changyue. Everyone has received the news about last night's incident. So what do the two leaders have to say now? Zhou Shihui had to ask calmly when he saw that the two leaders didn't say anything. Wu Changyue smiled faintly and said, "Old Zhou, you speak. The information is in your hands." Zhou Shihui looked at him, then glanced at the people in the conference hall. He deliberately looked at Yang Chao and saw that his expression didn't change. He nodded, picked up the information on the table in front of him and began to speak. Okay then. First, the deputy leader Pu Zhetsong's death. According to the information, Pu Zhetsong died in a vendetta, and the other party was a zombie. 3 days ago, Pu Zhetsong sent people to kidnap a woman in the base and raped her. He also connived with his subordinate Luanjian to rape the victim. The victim was Chen Yuding's legal wife, Shen Yuzhen, who was about to be promoted to deputy leader. When Leader Wu brought people to find Shen Yuzhen, she was already unconscious. She was also injected with zombie blood and was severely infected. This was the cause. Zhou Shihui paused, then flipped through the information and continued. Then the second thing, at around 9 o'clock last night, Pu Zhetsong was attacked by zombies and rushed into the research lab after being infected. Then he had a dispute with the leader of the second zombie virus research team, Liang Dashu, and then there was an explosion. Before the explosion, Pu Zhetsong was already killed, and the second leader of the zombie research team, Liang Dashu, was killed by the bomb. According to the research assistant, Ms. Emoli, there was an unfamiliar level 6 or level 7 psychic who was about to kill them, so Liang Dashu took out a grenade and detonated it. After saying that, he looked at Wu Changyue and said, "Leader Wu, bring your people here." Wu Changyue nodded and glanced at Xiao Liqing behind him. Xiao Liqing immediately stood up and walked out of the conference hall. Everyone waited quietly. After 2 minutes they saw Xiao Liqing come in with a group of people. A few of them were dragged in, because they were both missing a leg. These were the criminals that Wu Changyue and Lin Xiao, and the others had caught yesterday morning when they went to look for Shen Yuzhen. Xiao Liqing returned to his seat and said with a serious expression, "These are the criminals who were assaulting Shen Yuzhen when we found her." The prisoners had confessed that what they had done had been ordered by Pu Zhetsong. When we arrived, they had already injected the zombie virus into the victim's body. End of report. Wu Changyue waited for him to finish before nodding to him. After Xiao Liqing finished speaking, everyone in the conference room looked at the prisoners kneeling in front of the conference table with sharp eyes. Zhou Shihui looked at them indifferently and asked, "Is that so? What do you have to say?" None of the prisoners, however, had anything to say. They all hung their heads and said nothing. It seemed that they had given up and were desperate, so they knew that their fate would not change no matter what they said. Zhou Shihui waited for them for a while, and saw that they did not say anything. Then he continued, "This matter has been verified. What Director Xiao said has been confirmed to be the truth. The following 6 people, including Pu Zhetsong, Lin XX, and Huang XX, have violated the base's regulations on the protection of women. It has also been confirmed that Pu Zhetsong has also violated the base's regulations on the protection of women. Moreover, they injected the zombie virus into the victim, causing the victim's death. The situation is extremely bad. Now, Pu Zhetsong, Lin XX, Huang XX, Chen XX, and the other 3 people are sentenced to death by the base's law. Execution method. Execution by shooting. It will be carried out at noon today." After pronouncing the sentence, he glanced at everyone. He asked, "Is there any objection?" Everyone was silent, indicating that there was no objection. Zhou Shihui continued, "Well, the verdict is passed. Take them away." Yes. The soldiers standing behind the criminals immediately took 2 steps forward and dragged away the rapists who were kneeling on the ground. Wu Changyue still had a faint smile on his face, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. This was his usual expression, and no one could tell what he was thinking. However, Yang Chao's face sank. He could not speak at all. Originally, Pu Zhutsong's death was due to being bitten to death by a zombie. He had wanted to argue that this zombie might have been brought in by someone from the Hades base, and then push the blame onto Wu Chongyue. But now Wu Chongyue not only had a witness but also a criminal. Moreover, he had sealed the news so tightly that Yang Chao had not heard anything. Now he was completely caught off guard. Although Pu Zhutsong's matter had nothing to do with him, Pu Zhutsong was still his subordinate. He had already made a mistake of mismanaging his subordinates, so he could not say anything now. However, Yang Chao still asked a question. I want to ask, this Shen Yuzhen should have been found by Leader Wu in the end. So why did she turn into a zombie and attack Pu Zhutsong? Wu Chongyue put his hands on the conference table, his elbows on the table, and his 10 fingers clasped together under his chin. He looked at Yang Chao indifferently and said with the same smile, because we respected the wishes of the victim's husband, Chan Yuding, we handed Shen Yuzhen's body over to him to deal with. Is there a problem? Yang Chao said coldly, of course there is a problem. If you had directly burned Shen Yuzhen's body, then she would not have turned into a zombie and come into the base to attack Pu Zhutsong. Moreover, you can't even find her hiding place now. If this continues, how many more people will she attack? Who will bear the consequences now? Wu Chongyue smiled and said, who will bear the consequences? I'll tell you, of course it will be Pu Zhutsong, because this is his crime. Moreover, the security of the base is your responsibility. If you can't catch the target, who will bear the consequences? Moreover, at noon yesterday, Chen Yuding had already taken Shen Yuzhen's body out of the base. Outside the base, there is no longer any relationship with the base, and the security risks have been eliminated. As for why she turned into a zombie and sneaked in that night, shouldn't that be your problem? After all, the security system of the entire base is managed by you. What he meant was, it's all your fault, your fault, your fault. No matter how you quibble, it's all your fault. So what does your fault have to do with me? Yang Chao's face turned a little green after hearing his words, and he was speechless. You! Chapter 357. Zhou Shihui said, well, if Shen Yuzhen was taken out of the base before she became a zombie, then this has nothing to do with Leader Wu. As the victim's lover, as long as she doesn't stay in the base and cause harm to others, Chen Yuding has the right to take her away. It was not that Zhou Shihui was speaking up for Wu Chongyue, but it was the truth. It could only be said that Wu Chongyue was on the side of reason, which was why Yang Chao questioned him. It wouldn't have any effect. Therefore, Yang Chao's words would only be a slap in the face. After thinking about it, Yang Chao said with a gloomy face, there's no problem with my guards. Someone must have sneaked in the zombies, and there's even a zombie beast. For the past 2 days, your people have been bringing outsiders in and out. I have the right to suspect that you're behind this. Wu Chongyue looked at him and asked, Chief Yang, you need to have evidence when you say that. Otherwise it would be slander. I will find the evidence, and I will also catch that female zombie. Yang Chao snorted coldly. Zhou Shihui looked at the two of them. Seeing that Yang Chao had temporarily calmed down, he continued. Now let's talk about the second matter. After Pu Luotsong was bitten by zombies, he ran to the research institute. Their purpose was still to be found out. However, he got into an argument with 2 researchers, Liang Dashu and Mo Li, and the lab exploded. Now, may one of the victims, Mo Li, come forward and explain the situation? Wu Chongyue turned back and nodded at Mo Li. Mo Li stood up and walked out. She walked to the empty space in front of the conference table. There was a chair in the middle. Mo Li walked over and sat down, then straightened her back, looked straight ahead, and said expressionlessly, at 9:40 last night, Dr. Liang and I were still working in the underground research room of the research institute. Suddenly, Pu Zhutsong's face turned pale, and he rushed in with a crazed look on his face. Dr. Liang and I didn't know what was going on, so we didn't guard against him. In the end, he took the chance to kidnap me and threatened Dr. Liang to hand over the antidote to the zombie virus. But so far, we haven't developed an antidote to the virus, so we can't respond to Pu Krok's forceful request. She paused for a moment before continuing, but when he was agitated and not paying attention, I used physical combat skills to shake him off and escape from his control. At this moment, an unfamiliar metal ability user suddenly appeared and quickly killed Pu Xuetsong, who was suffering from the zombie virus outbreak. When he was about to take action against me and Dr. Liang detonated the bomb to protect me and the important research materials. Then he died in the explosion. Mo Li's expression and tone were calm, but her eyes were moist. But she blinked hard and quickly controlled herself. That was the situation during the explosion last night. Zhou Shihui looked down at the information in his hand and asked, "Do you know what level this metal ability user is?" Mo Li said, "My psychic ability is at the mid-stage of the 5th rank, so it won't work on an ability user above the 6th rank. Last night, I used my ability to test the other party and found out that he had no reaction to my ability at all. So my preliminary conclusion is that the other party is a peak late-stage 6th rank, or a level 7 ability user." Speaking of this, except for Wu Changyue and the others who already knew the situation in advance, and Yang Chao who had a guilty conscience, everyone else's expression changed. Especially Zhou Shihui's expression was slightly stunned. Then he looked up at Mo Li's eyes. "You mean the other party is a peak 6th rank near the 7th rank, or a level 7 ability user?" This matter was a bit big. An ability user almost at the same level as the 3 leaders of the base was hiding in their base, refusing to show up, and even killing the research staff of the base. This obviously didn't come with good intentions. So what was the other party's purpose? How did he sneak into the base? Mo Li nodded and replied with certainty, "Yes." Zhou Shihui turned his head and nodded to Wu Changyue with a serious expression. Wu Changyue looked at Mo Li and nodded to her. Mo Li immediately stood up from the chair, then walked back to the seat behind Wu Changyue and sat down. Zhou Shihui looked at Yang Chao and Wu Changyue and said, "So in the end, the researchers Liang Dashu and Pu Rukang died because of this metal ability user. So where was this metal type ability user now? What is his purpose? What is he planning to do in our base?" Wu Changyue crossed his fingers in front of his chin and said, "No one knows what his purpose is right now. We can only wait until we find the other party and ask him face to face. Since the other party is a level 6 or 7 ability user, it should be easy for him to enter the base. But now that he is hiding, it will be very difficult for us to find him. The most important thing now is to find that female zombie and that zombie beast, as well as the person who let the zombie beast into the base." Yang Chao said coldly. His words seemed to be changing the topic and attention. "Zombie beast? Leader Yang, you mentioned the zombie beast from the beginning. May I ask why you think so?" Zhou Shihui looked at Yang Chao with a puzzled expression. Yang Chao said to the deputy leader next to him, "Go and bring it up." The deputy leader next to him immediately stood up and looked at Yang Chao with a somewhat uneasy expression. Then he turned and left. Everyone in the conference hall watched him leave, and not long after, they saw him and a few people carrying an object covered with a piece of white cloth. The white cloth covering the object was stained with a large amount of bright red blood, and looking at the shape of the object carried by the 4 people, it looked like a person. After the 4 people placed the cloth on the ground, one of them went forward to remove the white cloth. Sure enough, it revealed a bloody female corpse that was missing more than half of the head and the front of the arm. Seeing this corpse, there were only 2 kinds of expressions on everyone's faces. One was the ability user who often left the base to carry out missions. The other was the technical personnel who had never left the base and only worked in the base. Those who often left the base did not have any change in expression when they saw this kind of corpse, and their faces were calm. As for those who had never left the base to see the appearance of zombies and corpses, and stayed under the protection of the base for a few years, their expressions changed when they saw this bloody scene. All of their faces were filled with shock and slight fright. Yang Chao pointed at the corpse and said, "You may not be able to recognize this victim who has lost more than half of her head, but I think there are many people who know her. She is my sister Yang Yan. Last night at around 9 o'clock, she suddenly disappeared for a few minutes, and when she was found she was already like this." After hearing Yang Chao's words, everyone's expression immediately changed again. This time it became a little strange. Some even rejoiced in their hearts. Chapter 358. This woman was not a good person. In the base, she relied on the fact that she was the leader's sister to be condescending and bully the weak. When she walked in the base, she was a rude and narrow-minded woman. She often took away the items that others wanted to exchange in the trading center, but did not give anything to the other party. Or she would take away other people's valuable items and give them cheap and worthless things. Anyway, as long as she liked it, she must get it. And generally there was only one method, which was to rob. Fortunately, she was not a man. If she was a man, she would definitely rob a woman. If there was a woman that the people in the base hated the most was Lu Tianyu, then the second was Yang Yan. So now that they saw this woman dead, many people were happy in their hearts. But in front of Yang Chao, they did not show it. They only secretly felt good in their hearts. As soon as Yang Chao brought Yang Yan's body up, he immediately successfully attracted everyone's attention. Zhou Shihui, Wu Changyue, and the others stood up from their seats, then left their seats and walked toward the body. The wound on the head obviously has traces of being bitten by a beast, and the arm was bitten off. It is very likely that it was a large zombie beast. Zhou Shihui went forward and squatted down to check the wound, then said. Wu Changyue stood behind him with his hands in his trouser pockets and nodded in agreement. He nodded in agreement, indeed. Zhou Shihui stood up and asked Yang Chao, "Did you see the murderous zombie beast?" Yang Chao shook his head with a gloomy expression and said, "When I went over, it was already like this." The people protecting her said that they did not see anything appear. Zhou Shihui and Wu Changyue looked at each other and said, "Then where did this zombie beast come from?" I don't know where the zombie beast came from. However, I do know how that level 7 arcanist came in. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out strangely. Everyone turned around and saw a woman wearing a hat standing behind Wu Changyue's row of chairs without them noticing. As soon as they saw Lin Xiao appear, everyone stood up. Because she was not an important member of the base's management, nor was she a senior member. Yet, she appeared directly in their conference hall. If they were discussing something important, wouldn't she have heard everything? "Who is it?" "It's you. Who are you?" Several voices rang out at the same time. At this time, Lin Xiao was not wearing sunglasses, but her eyes were no longer dark zombie eyes. Instead, it was a pair of transparent white eyes with a hint of brown. Although she didn't look like a normal person, it was impossible to tell that she was a zombie. Wu Changyue looked at her in surprise. He was the one who said, "It's you," just now. The other two voices belonged to Yang Chao and Zhou Shihui. Lin Xiao walked over from behind and introduced himself. "My surname is Liu. I came with the people from the Netherworld King's base. You might not know who that level 7 metal ability user is, but I do. This is a guest invited in by your chief Yang, but I don't know why he doesn't seem to know anything." As she spoke, she walked towards Yang Chao. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who are you? Is this a place where you should trespass? Get out now." Yang Chao was shocked by Lin Xiao's words and shouted at her in panic. Wu Changyue said to him lightly, "Why are you panicking? Let me introduce to everyone. This is Miss Liu. She is the partner of the Netherworld King's base, and also the founder of the new base that the Netherworld King's base is preparing to build." After saying that, he turned his head and stared at Lin Xiao's face for a few seconds, and a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. But soon he had a slight headache. This female zombie was really here to cause trouble. And she was here to cause trouble. The higher-ups already knew that the Netherworld King's base was going to build a new base. But they rarely saw the current Lin Xiao because she rarely showed her face. On the other hand, the Lin family and Yuan Tianqing often showed their faces. Yang Chao said coldly, "I don't care who she is, irrelevant people get out now." Lin Xiao smiled calmly and said, "Why would I be an unrelated person? Didn't you hear me just now? I'm the informant, reporting that you colluded with the robbers outside, and are preparing to carry out a bloodbath in the base." "Shut up. Be careful of your tongue if you talk nonsense again." Yang Chao immediately shouted at her and raised his hand. If Lin Xiao said one more word, he might immediately cut off her tongue. "Wait a minute, do you have evidence for what you said?" Zhou Shihui quickly stopped Yang Chao, then looked at Lin Xiao and asked. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "I don't have evidence. But you can ask him himself." After saying that, she suddenly reached out to a soldier in military uniform who was standing at the door. Everyone's eyes followed the direction she was pointing. Lin Xiao had long smelled his scent, and the disguise was useless against her. Normally, if someone sneaked in and was pointed out in front of everyone, their first reaction would be to turn around and run with a guilty conscience. But this soldier didn't. When he was pointed at by Lin Xiao, he was slightly stunned. But he quickly recovered and took off the hat on his head with a faint smile. I've been discovered. I'm very curious, you've never seen me before. How did you recognize me? That woman has seen me before, but she didn't recognize me. Tang He took off the hat and revealed his face. He turned around and walked in with the hat, then looked at Lin Xiao curiously and asked. After saying that, he pointed at Emily who was beside Wu Changyue. It's you. How dare you show up? As soon as Emily saw him, her ice-cold face couldn't keep up. She immediately pointed at him and shouted, her voice full of anger. Tang He just smiled and said, why wouldn't I dare to come? What can you do to me even if I'm here? After seeing Tang He come out, Yang Chao's face changed. He suddenly pointed at Tang He and said, you're that level 7 arcanist of unknown origin? Tell me, what's your purpose here? He was obviously trying to cut off his relationship with Tang He. If Tang He said that he knew him, then he would have to admit that he knew him. He could only pretend that he didn't know him and say that Tang He was talking nonsense. However, Tang He just looked at him with an inscrutable expression and said, I'm here to know if your secret experiment was successful. His words made Yang Chao's face change. Before he could say anything, Wu Chengwei on the other side asked calmly, experiment? Are you talking about diluting a small amount of the virus and injecting it into the bodies of arcanists to turn them into a new type of parasitic zombies? Wu Chengyue's words made Yang Chao on the other side feel that something was wrong. His eyes suddenly turned cold and he shouted fiercely, do it! Chapter 359. Under Yang Chao's shout, he suddenly swung his hand at Wu Changyue and launched an attack with his ability. Countless gusts of wind suddenly broke through the glass window and rushed in, then rolled the entire conference hall out of the window. The wind from Yang Chao's attack was very strong, at least above level 10. Like a typhoon passing through, it instantly flipped the tables and chairs in the room, flying and smashing in the direction of the wind. Everyone was blown away by the wind, and those ordinary people without abilities were swaying left and right. After Wu Changyue finished his words, he had already mentally prepared himself for Yang Chao's attack. Seeing Yang Chao make a move, he immediately raised his hand and pulled a diagonal line in the air. Rumble, bolts of lightning fell from the sky, and then directly jumped in through the broken window like an electric dragon, converging toward Yang Chao. On the other side, Zhou Shihui stood firmly in place and waved his hand. The cement on the wall melted and then converged toward his side, quickly forming a cement wall, protecting the people behind him from the wind. Yang Chao, you really colluded with outsiders. Are you planning to take the base for yourself? His expression sank slightly as he shouted at Yang Chao sternly. Yang Chao dodged to the other side when Wu Chengyue's lightning struck. Then he stood there, the long black military jacket on his body swaying with the wind. He sneered and said, now that it has come to this, since you all know, then we don't have to pretend to talk. That will be very tiring. I am the owner of this base and you all of you can die. After that, Yang Chao pointed at Wu Changyue and said, Wu Changyue, I have tolerated you for a long time. If you don't get out of the base with your people today, then all of you will die here. Come out. After Yang Chao suddenly gave the order, the expressions of a small number of people behind him immediately changed. Each and every one of their faces were cold and twisted, and then they opened their eyes wide and began to grit their teeth. Some of the others calmly followed behind Yang Chao, and a small number of them retreated to another corner in a panic, looking at the confrontation between Yang Chao and Wu Changyue with suspicion. Wu Changyue just said to him indifferently, Yang Chao, the base was built by everyone together. It is not yours alone, so if you do this now, everyone will not agree. Because the wind in the room had not stopped, the other ability users protected the ordinary people, and then pulled them to a corner to avoid the wind. Soon only Wu Changyue, Yang Chao, Tang He, and Zhou Shihui were left in the middle of the hall. Xiao Yunlong, Yin Fangyu, and several other deputy leaders retreated slightly and stood behind their leaders. Everyone in the conference hall today had contributed greatly to the construction of the base. No one was willing to give up the base that they had worked so hard to build to only one person. Even if he was a level 7 ability user. Yang Chao, what you've done behind the scenes isn't beneficial to the base at all. Instead, it's harming everyone. Do you think that by injecting the zombie virus into a human's body, you can increase your strength quickly? Then you should also know that this will only make humans slowly lose their nature? Xiao Yunlong stood behind Wu Changyue, pointing at Yang Chao and scolding. Yang Chao looked at them with a gloomy face. It turned out that Wu Changyue already knew about his underground experiment. Did you take away my researchers? He waved his hand to remove the wind in the room and stared at Wu Changyue. Yang Chao, did we agree to your experiment? No wonder the people in the base have been disappearing for unknown reasons in the past few months, and the number is increasing. You dare to use the living people in the base for experiments, you lunatic. Zhou Shihui stared at Yang Chao and questioned him sternly. Yang Chao smiled wantonly and said, you don't understand. If my experiment is successful, won't we have a powerful army? At that time my base will expand and it will be the largest survivor base in the country. At that time the other bases will have to pay tribute to us with food and supplies. Isn't that good? Wu Changyue's smile had a hint of sarcasm. He said, you are ambitious but you think too much. There is nothing wrong with you, just that there is something wrong with your brain. Pfft. Yanfeng Yu couldn't help but laugh at Wu Changyue's words. Be serious. There is a fight. The bespectacled old man beside her suddenly turned his head and said to her. Cough. Yanfeng Yu immediately stopped smiling. She couldn't laugh. Be serious. Be serious. Yang Chao's face darkened at Wu Changyue's words. He said coldly, then let's see if I am thinking too much. As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand again. Countless tornadoes directly rolled in from the outside towards the window. In an instant the frame of the window was swept away and even the wall was broken. The original window was immediately crushed into a big hole by the rotating wind. At this time Tang He suddenly and quietly took control of the flying metal objects. Then, he melted them into a large number of sharp objects and shot them in Zhou Shihui's direction. Zhou Shihui's people saw the sharp metal objects flying towards them. They all stood in place calmly. This was because the concrete wall behind them quickly moved in front of them, blocking the sharp pieces of metal that were shot down from the wall. At this time the people downstairs all stopped in their tracks. They looked up in surprise at the gusts of wind and thunder at the top of the machine building. Huh, is that the conference hall above? What's going on? Wind and thunder elements? Did Leader Wu and Leader Yang fight? The people below who didn't know the situation pointed up curiously. This morning a lot of the base's top management went up for a meeting. What's the situation now? Last night's search caused a huge commotion. What happened today? The others all started discussing. Moreover, the people in the distance all gathered here. Looking at the wind and thunder elements, it must be the two leaders fighting. They finally made a move. We've been holding it in for so long. I felt that something big was going to happen today. So it's the leaders fighting. Some people who heard the wind whispered. And Lin Xiao, who was done with her business, had already left the machine building in the chaos. Now she stood with her hands crossed in front of her chest. She stood on the roof of a lower building opposite the machine building and watched the show. When she heard what Wu Changyue said, she finally understood why she felt a strange aura from the people behind Yang Chao. Also, the smell that those people emitted was not right. It turned out that they had been injected with a diluted virus. Their bodies were infected. But this infection was very light and there was a feeling of mutation in it. It was different from the infection of a normal person after being bitten by a zombie. But they were also different from normal people. Lin Xiao was very curious just now. So this was the case. Looking at the twisted faces of these people, they were indeed a bit similar to the zombies outside. After sensing the fierce battle in the machine building, Lin Xiao turned around and slipped away towards Lin Wenwen's district. And running away after doing something feels so good. Chapter 360. Actually, Lin Xiao had gone to the inner district government building early in the morning to stir up trouble because Tang He, who had stayed here all night, suddenly left early in the morning. Lin Xiao hadn't been back for long after killing Yang Yan when he sensed Tang He again. However, he didn't see anything even after watching all night. Thus, Lin Xiao watched him all night and only left with him at dawn to watch the show. Lin Xiao returned to the outer district in a few minutes and appeared at the door. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Wei Jingchen and Lin Xiao respectfully opened the door for her. Lin Xiao sniffed and asked before he opened the door, when did Tiny come over? Are you talking about Miss Lingling? She just got here not long ago. Wei Jingchen replied as he pushed the door open. Lin Xiao had just walked in when a small figure carrying a ball of gray fur ran over to her. The few people who were gathered in front of the window all looked back. When they saw it was Lin Xiao, they all asked her, "You're back so soon? Didn't they just start fighting?" Lin Xiao rubbed Tiny's head and walked to the sofa as she said, They did start fighting. But I was afraid that someone would come here and cause trouble, so I came back. I reckon that Yang Chao will leave in defeat. He can't beat Wu Changyue. They've already set up a trap for Yang Chao to jump in." As she spoke, she paused for a moment and looked around before pointing at the little one who followed her thighs to the sofa and asked, "Who brought this child here?" Lin Wenwen walked back and looked at her. "Oh, Captain Huang Ming brought a team of people to escort her here. And then they left." Lin Xiao looked at Tiny strangely and muttered to herself, "Why did he bring the child here? Is the other places not safe? Is this the only place safe?" At this moment, a few explosions suddenly came from the direction that Yuan Tianxing and the others were looking at. It seemed to be very lively over there. "Looks like they've really started fighting and it's quite intense," Yuan Tianxing said when he saw the commotion over there. Then he turned around and asked Lin Xiao, "What happened when you were over there?" Lin Xiao looked at the little guy and replied without raising his head, "Oh, you're having a verbal battle. I was getting impatient, so I added some fuel for them. Otherwise, I don't know how long it would take for them to make a move." Yuan Tianxing looked at her speechlessly. "You're not going to watch the show. You're going to make it happen, aren't you?" Lin Xiao said lightly, "Of course, if I could beat Yang Chao now, why would I need to wait for Wu Changyue to make a move?" Lin Wenwen returned to the window and looked outside. After a while, he turned back to look at Lin Xiao. There was a strange light in his eyes, and the smile on his face deepened. Lin Xiao seemed to feel something and turned to look at her. "Are you happy that they are fighting? Look at how happy you are." A thought flashed through Lin Wenwen's mind. He asked a question he already knew the answer to. "How did you know I was secretly happy?" Lin Xiao turned around and took out a writing board, then handed it to Xiao Budian along with the pen. As he taught her how to draw, he said, "The expression on your face says it all." Lin Wenwen smiled. "Well, I didn't expect you to know me so well." Long Qingying looked at Lin Wenwen inexplicably, but her attention was quickly attracted by the battle in the distance. Du Yuanxing stared over there excitedly and said, "I heard that the other leader of this base with the surname Zhou is actually on Wu Qingyue's side. This Yang Chao is fighting the two of them. What kind of trump card does he have? Otherwise, he wouldn't be stupid enough to pick two powerhouses of the same level, right?" Lin Xiao said, "His trump card is that he has a level 7 partner. It's now 2 against 2. Du Yuanxing looked back at her strangely and asked, "Huh? Where did this other one come from?" Lin Xiao said, "He's already here, and that level 7 arcanist has been watching you guys for the past 2 days. It's just that you guys haven't noticed." When she said that, Yuan Tianxing, Lin Wenwen, and the others were shocked. Then they looked at each other. There was actually a level 7 arcanist watching them. It seemed that Lu Tianyi and Yan Fengyu's words were not exaggerated at all. Du Yuanxing was also surprised and asked, "Why is he watching us? Did they want to take this opportunity to kidnap Wenwen? If he wanted to fight, he could just do it directly. We don't even have the ability to resist." Lin Xiao glanced at Lin Wenwen and said, "His target is indeed Lin Wenwen, but he might have other thoughts. That's why I didn't do anything." She had already sensed that the robber did not completely listen to Yang Chao's words. Moreover, there seemed to be suspicions of using Yang Chao. Who knew if that lunatic Yang Chao knew about this? Yuan Tianxing and the others looked at Lin Wenwen in silence. The smile on Lin Wenwen's face did not fade. She said, "It seems that I am very tempting. Is there any way to change it?" Lin Xiao glanced at her and casually said, "Yes, if you can cut your hair. The shorter the better, like an image. This will reduce the chances of people committing crimes." Lin Wenwen's expression froze for a moment. Then he frowned. After a few seconds of silence, she said something that surprised everyone. If that's really the case, then I will cut it. What do you think? Lin Xiao turned to look at her in surprise. You're willing to do that? She knew that this girl cherished her long, straight, and smooth hair very much. In the past, she felt that it was a hindrance to look at her hair, so she had asked her to cut it many times. However, Lin Wenwen never agreed and would even throw a tantrum at her. Now that she had said such a thing, could it be that she was really going to cut it because of what she said? Long Qingying walked over and said to her, actually, it doesn't matter whether you cut it or not. You still have to learn to protect yourself. After all, the leader protected you in the past, but now you have to protect yourself. Lin Wenwen looked at Lin Xiao with a complicated expression. However, Lin Xiao did not look at her. Instead, she looked at Tiny Tot and said, Qingqing is right. After learning to protect yourself, you have to learn to protect others. Family, friends. Don't you feel that you have always been protected by family and friends? Have you ever thought that if one day they suddenly lose the ability to protect you, who can you rely on? She remembered that she had said these words to Lin Wenwen before. However, at that time she refused to listen and still loved to rely on others. Even when she went out, she needed someone to follow her. She had never gone out alone. At that time, Lin Xiao felt that she had the ability to protect her family and friends, so she let her go. However, she did not expect that the end of the world would suddenly come. In the end of the world, everything was chaotic and desperate. Only the fittest survived, and those who had the ability could live to the end. Therefore, people who could not even protect themselves in the end of the world were indeed very dangerous. Lin Wenwen stood by the window and stared at Lin Xiao without saying a word. After a few seconds, she suddenly turned around and walked into the bedroom, then closed the door. Chapter 361. The people outside looked at each other. Lin Xiao also raised her head in confusion. She turned to look at the others. Did I say something wrong? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and sighed. No, you didn't say anything wrong. Maybe she can't accept what you said at the moment. After all, she used to be a princess in the Pluto base. But now she should learn how to grow up. Long Qingying expressionlessly crossed her arms and said, There's no other way. The protective barrier that the leader gave her is gone, so she really needs to learn how to protect herself. Lin Wenwen, who was leaning against the door of the room, could hear their conversation. She gently let go of the door and walked to the dressing table in the room to sit down. Looking at the long-haired woman in the mirror, Lin Wenwen looked down at the long black hair hanging in front of her chest. Then she used both hands to pick it up. After touching it for a few seconds, she took a deep breath. She suddenly took out a pair of scissors from the drawer and grabbed a lock of long hair. Holding the scissors, she cut it along her ear once, then twice, then thrice. Lin Xiao, who was in the living room, wasn't interested in the battle outside. She was excitedly teaching Tiny Tot how to draw. There was a commotion in the neighborhood. Everyone was curious about what was happening in the inner district and why there was such a big commotion. At this time, the top few floors of the inner district government building were riddled with holes. Yang Chao stepped on a tornado and floated in midair. Wu Chengyue stood on the roof of the building with his hands behind his back. His figure was slender and straight. He wore a strict and cool black military uniform that went above his knees. The hem of the uniform fluttered in the wind, revealing his straight long legs. He slightly raised his chin. There was a faint smile on his handsome face, but his eyes were cold as he looked at Yang Chao in midair. The people gathered around looked at the situation on the top of the building in confusion. The people in the building also evacuated from the building and ran out from the inside. Wu Chengyue's head was shrouded by a large black cloud, dimming the light in this area. From time to time, muffled sounds of thunder could be heard in the clouds, and flashes of lightning could be seen from time to time. Zhou Shihui stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass in the middle level of the building. The glass in front of him had all been shattered by their attacks. Because Yang Chao secretly used the humans in the base to conduct dangerous virus experiments, it led to the deaths of the missing people in the past 2 to 3 months. The number of victims had already reached 500. From today onwards, I, together with Leader Wu and the other management personnel, have come to a decision to expel Yang Chao and his subordinates who participated in the experiment from the base. The expulsion list will be announced soon. Please, for the sake of the peace of the base, let's deal with them together. Zhou Shihui's voice was loud and clear, coming down from upstairs. What? So the missing people were all captured by him? Virus experiment? What virus experiment? And they're all dead? The crowd below immediately became restless. He expressed his disbelief at Yang Chao's actions, and at the same time, objected to Zhou Shihui's expulsion order. They killed so many people, why should we let them go? Don't let them go. I want them to pay with their lives. Yes, Leader Zhou. We can't let them go. We should kill this lunatic Yang Chao. He actually dared to use living people for experiments. His crime is unforgivable. At this moment, Zhou Shihui said, don't worry, we don't intend to let the culprit, Yang Chao, escape. You just have to see what Leader Wu is capable of. Yang Chao stood in midair and sneered, want to catch me? Do you have that ability? As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand in the direction of the people on the ground. Whoosh! Whoosh! A gust of level 10 wind immediately swept towards these people's location. Quick, quick! Hold him! Quick, hide! The people on the ground immediately couldn't be bothered to watch the commotion, and when the wind blew, they frantically looked for a place to hide. Some of them couldn't react in time and were immediately blown off the ground by the wind, flipping twice in midair before falling to the ground. Most of them were directly blown to the ground and even rolled a few times. Boom! A few bolts of purple lightning immediately descended from the sky, instantly striking towards Yang Chao. Yang Chao's figure flashed, and very quickly he flashed to another location. But before he could stop, a bolt of lightning struck him from the top of his head. On the top of the government building, Wu Chengyue's outstretched finger pointed at Yang Chao's figure as he moved. One after another, bolts of lightning as thick as an arm chased after Yang Chao, and one after another, dodged above Yang Chao's head. However, Yang Chao was of the wind attribute, and although his attack power was slightly weaker than Wu Chengyue's, but his dodging ability was top-notch. After dodging a few times, he still didn't let Wu Chengyue's lightning touch him. Hey, is this all a lightning ability user can do? Yang Chao was still in the mood to mock Wu Chengyue while dodging. His voice was transmitted far away through the control of the energy in his body. Wu Chengyue used his slender fingers with distinct joints to point left and right at Yang Chao. Wherever his finger pointed, lightning would descend. After hearing Yang Chao's words, he smiled faintly and said, do you want to see the power of the lightning attribute? Then I'll let you have your wish. As he spoke, he suddenly opened all his fingers. He clenched his fist into the shape of a claw and brought it down. Then the light above Yang Chao's head dimmed, and the black clouds above suddenly pressed down. Streaks of concentrated lightning struck down at the same time, like a thunderstorm falling from above Yang Chao's head. By the time Yang Chao looked up and realized the situation, it was already too late. Although the thunderstorm did not cover a large area, it still covered an area of 20 meters. Moreover, it was extremely fast, so no matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to immediately escape from this position. Rumble. Yang Chao desperately used his wind ability to surround himself and then quickly moved away. He did not expect that when he moved, the dense lightning would move with him. Therefore, Yang Chao was soon enveloped by bolts of lightning, and then he was blasted down from the sky. On the other side, when Tang He saw that Yang Chao had no chance of winning, he suddenly turned around and retreated. Stop right there. Do you want to run? Zhou Shihui stared at him. He immediately chased after them. Although Yang Chao fell to the ground, he did not suffer any serious injuries. Because there was still a layer of wind protecting him, Yang Chao, who fell to the ground, happened to see Tang He retreating. What kind of helper did you find? He immediately ran away when he saw that the situation wasn't right. What a good eye. Wu Chengyue directly jumped down from the roof and stood on a telephone pole next to Yang Chao. He smiled faintly. Chapter 362. Yang Chao already had a bad premonition when he saw Tang He escaping. Now that he heard Wu Chengyue's words, his face immediately turned gloomy. But before he had the mood to care about Tang He, a thick bolt of lightning descended from the sky and struck him. This bolt of lightning was as thick as a house beam, and it seemed to have a mind of its own as it rushed towards Yang Chao's head. Yang Chao's heart skipped a beat as he felt a chill down his spine. In an instant, a sense of crisis arose spontaneously. He quickly dodged. But just as he dodged, the bolt of lightning also changed direction. It made a turn in midair and chased after him. Moreover, the speed of this bolt of lightning was more than 10 times faster than before. In the blink of an eye, it caught up to Yang Chao. Then with a boom, it directly exploded on Yang Chao's back. Ah, plop! Yang Chao screamed as he was directly blown to the ground. This time, although his wind element helped him block most of the lightning force that exploded on his body was also very terrifying. Yang Chao rolled on the ground before he trembled as he climbed up from the ground. His black military robe had been blown to tatters, and his face was also charred. This was the difference in strength between him and Wu Chengyue. Even if they were experts of the same level, even if they were powerhouses of the same level, the destructive power of his wind element and Wu Chengyue's lightning force wasn't on the same level. Just as he got up, he suddenly raised his head, only to see another thick bolt of lightning coming down from above. Boom! Yang Chao didn't even have time to react this time and was directly bombarded again. Wu Chengyue's lightning blasted away more than half of the energy in his body, and the remaining energy was uncontrollably jumping around in his body. This experiment of yours, you and your subordinates, isn't enough to repay the lives of those who died because of you. Wu Chengyue's indifferent voice came over. It was rare for him to be so cold after he finished speaking. Usually, he would have a faint smile and his voice would be gentle. Today, although the smile on his face was still hanging on the corner of his mouth, his eyes were cold. Ha ha ha. Want to kill me? Do you think it's that easy? Yang Chao was like a humanoid charcoal that was blasted black as he stood up shakily. His face suddenly twisted as he laughed out loud. He opened his mouth wide and bared his teeth. The shape of his mouth began to crack in a strange manner. Then the bones on his body began to creak. His body began to slowly deform. Roar! A pool of saliva flowed out from Yang Chao's gaping mouth. His eyes were still clear, but with a hint of madness. He roared at Wu Chengyue, "Let me show you the results of my experiment, ha 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 ha." Wu Chengyue looked at Yang Chao, whose body and bones had mutated into a monster that was neither human nor monster. He could not help but cover his eyes and say, "I say, you've become so ugly that I really don't want to fight you. What an eyesore." As he spoke, he suddenly swiped his finger down in Yang Chao's direction, and another bolt of lightning fell. Boom! The lightning fell, but just as it was about to hit Yang Chao suddenly dodged Wu Chengyue's lightning. Then he leaped onto the wall next to him and climbed up like a spider. Boom! Another clap of thunder. A bolt of purple lightning struck toward Yang Chao, who was crawling on the wall. The people hiding downstairs looked at Yang Chao with a dumbfounded expression when they saw him become like this. How did he become like this? What kind of monster is this? The bones on Yang Chao's back had become huge protrusions, and his back was bent like a bow. His arms had become thicker than his thighs, and his fingers had become curved claws. His legs were strangely bent into an O shape, and his whole body was crawling on the ground. Yang Chao quickly crawled on the wall and quickly leaped to the other side. "He's ready to escape. Are you still not going to act?" Xiao Yunlong stood behind Wu Chengyue and asked. Wu Chengyue waved his hand and several bolts of lightning fell from the sky. They struck toward Yang Chao, who was about to turn into the other side of the wall, but he cleverly avoided them. "Look, his dodging ability has improved a lot, and I guess he may be immune to energy attacks." Wu Chengyue stared at Yang Chao and said. He suddenly turned to the other side in a flash and disappeared from sight. Wu Chengyue hurriedly leaped out from the top of the government building and flew toward Yang Chao's building. Xiao Yunlong looked at his figure that left in an instant and curiously followed. Even a level 7 arcanist would not be able to float in the air. Wind ability users were special because they had the support of the wind. That was why only wind-type metahumans could fly. Wu Chengyue leaped to the top of the building on the other side and chased after Yang Chao, who was dodging, and released several bolts of lightning. Although these bolts of lightning had successfully exploded on Yang Chao's body, it was just like what he said. There was no effect. Yang Chao, who was struck by lightning a few times, was still scurrying around along the wall without any effect. Xiao Yunlong followed and said in surprise when he saw the situation, "Hey, it seems like there's really no reaction to your attacks?" He raised his hand and waved in Yang Chao's direction, and a large number of metal objects turned into sharp shapes, appearing out of thin air around Yang Chao. Then he shot toward Yang Chao for a while. Roar! Yang Chao dodged in panic, but there were still some sharp metal objects that pierced his body. It made him howl in pain, and his movements also paused a few times. He quickly slowed down. It seems that only physical attacks can have an effect on him. Xiao Yunlong retracted his hand and said. Wu Chengyue nodded and did not say anything more, and chased after Yang Chao again. Yang Chao was no longer in the mood to continue fighting, so he was fleeing for his life. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who was playing with Tiny Tot in the room, suddenly seemed to have sensed something. She turned her head and looked at the window where the few people were still lying, and her eyes looked far away in the direction of the inner district. But she quickly turned back, and suddenly her eyes swept across the room that Lin Wenwen had just entered. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said, "Qing, go in and see what's wrong with Wan? Did I go too far with my words just now?" Long Qingying silently looked at her for a few seconds, and suddenly said, "She couldn't have gone to get a haircut, right?" Lin Xiao looked at her with a face full of suspicion, and then said, "Impossible, she treasures her hair so much. How could she bear to cut it off?" Long Qingying slightly bowed her head and thought for a moment, but said, "No, you're not wrong. But I feel that she's a little strange these 2 days." As she spoke, she looked up at the others, and saw that they all nodded at her with a little agreement. "Then I'll go take a look." With that, she turned and walked toward the bedroom. Chapter 363. Lin Xiao looked back at Yuan Tianqing and asked, "She said Wenwen has been weird these days? What's going on?" Yuan Tianqing also shook his head in confusion, indicating that he didn't know what she was thinking. Women's minds were the hardest to understand. They could be gloomy one moment and stormy the next. Who knew? Du Yuanqing's eyes were a bit strange, and he quickly turned his head to look out the window. He felt that he shouldn't say anything about Lin Wenwen asking about her. He didn't want this zombie lady to misunderstand something. That would be terrible. Long Qingying knocked on the door before pushing it open. When she went in, she saw Lin Wenwen sitting in front of the dresser, cutting her hair with a pair of scissors. At this time, Lin Wenwen's beautiful long black hair had been cut off by her. Long Qingying widened her eyes in disbelief and said, You really cut it off? What were you thinking?" She felt that Lin Wenwen wouldn't really listen to Lin Xiao, right? Lin Wenwen turned around and sighed, "I don't want to trouble you guys, so I want to change as much as I can. Qing, come here, I can't cut the back, you help me." Long Qingying walked over to her in bewilderment, still looking at her in disbelief. "What's with that look? You guys are the ones who think I don't know how to protect myself, okay? You guys say that wearing a dress will cause people to commit crimes, but I don't wear it anymore, right? Long hair is a hindrance, so I'll cut it now, okay? Also, I want to learn physical skills from you, so you have to be responsible for teaching me." Lin Wenwen rolled her eyes and handed the scissors to her. Long Qingying took the scissors and protested, "Huh? Why do I have to be responsible for teaching you? Can't you find someone else?" Lin Wenwen looked up at her and asked, "Then tell me, who is more suitable to teach me?" Long Qingying looked at her and said, "You can ask Sister Wuxia to teach you. Her physical skills are also very good. Moreover, her ability is a physical type." Lin Wenwen rolled his eyes at her again and said, "You also said that my sister-in-law has a physical ability. She can destroy a wall with one kick, okay? You want her to teach me? Do you want her to cripple me? Can't you just let me learn the basics from you, and then find her to teach me?" Long Qingying looked at her speechlessly and felt that she was right. Chang Wangshua's ability was physical. Her physical strength was at least 5 times that of a normal person. Now that she was level 5, it would be easy for her to beat up 10 normal men. Not to mention beating up the delicate Miss Lin Wenwen. If he wanted to train his body, there was nothing faster than getting beaten up. This was the best way to stimulate his abilities. Long Qingying looked at her face, raised her eyebrows, and said suspiciously, "All right, you need to train your body first. At least improve your stamina before you can practice combat. Are you really going to do this? You're not just joking, are you?" Or would he stop after 2 days? I don't have time to play with you. Lin Wenwen chuckled and said, You're looking down on me. I'll make you drop your glasses. Long Qingying took a pair of scissors and cut the air a few times. She said expressionlessly, Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses. Lin Wenwen shrugged his shoulders, turned his back to her and said, Then you should support your chin. Lin Xiao, who had faintly heard their conversation in the room, had a strange expression on her face. She looked at the others, thought for a moment and didn't say anything. But in her heart, she thought that Long Qingying was right. Lin Wenwen was a little strange now. She cut her hair. She was actually willing to cut her hair. She had kept her hair for more than 10 years, and she wouldn't cut it no matter how many times she asked her to. Now she had thought it through. Also, what the hell was physical training? She had a delicate body that couldn't even walk 5 meters with half a bucket of water, and now she wanted to learn physical combat? Wouldn't she be screaming after getting hit a few times? Was her sister transmigrated by someone else? Because she had transmigrated someone else. Listening to the continuous roar of thunder from the inner district outside the window, and the situation was getting more and more intense. Yuan Tianqing said, Leader Wu's lightning ability is really powerful, but why is it so powerful now? You haven't taken care of that Yang Chao yet? Isn't he a wind ability user? Other than being good at dodging skills, his defense and attack aren't strong. Du Yuanqing nodded and said in agreement, Yes. They've been fighting for half an hour, and it seems like their positions are getting more and more off. Looks like that Yang Chao is preparing to run. Yuan Tianqing crossed his arms in front of his chest and said, Leader Wu probably won't let him run. At this time Lin Xiao said, That's not necessarily true. I don't know what method that Yang Chao used, but his entire aura seems to have changed. If Wu Chengwei is too arrogant, he might regret it. But he has been preparing for so long. He probably won't be careless and let Yang Chao escape. That would be too humiliating. Yuan Tianqing looked back at her and said, What do you feel? Lin Xiao shook her head and said, Just some faint aura changes. With that, she stood up and walked to the window. She closed her eyes and sniffed outside. She opened her eyes and said, His body is infected with a virus, and he should have used his ability to suppress it. Now he seems to have released the virus in his body, and he has become a body that is neither human nor zombie. If I'm not wrong, his appearance might have changed. This was just a vague premonition of hers, but she wasn't sure if it was true. Not long after, the door to Lin Wenwen's room suddenly opened. Lin Xiao and the others immediately turned to look and saw a young woman with short hair walking out. Lin Wenwen walked out with a head of coarsely cut short hair that reached her ears. Her entire temperament had changed. The originally quiet and elegant feeling had suddenly become neat and clean. That beautiful doll-like face had a faint smile, and there was a faint sense of cuteness that was different from before. Also, there was a flash of determination in her eyes. Long Qingying, who was behind her, looked at the reactions of Yuan Tianqing and the others with interest. Because Lin Xiao had heard the conversation between the two of them in the room, she already had a premonition in her heart. So now that she saw her sister's change in appearance, she at most felt that it was a little strange. Also, her sister's short hair didn't seem that ugly. It was all thanks to her baby face. It was just that the style of her hair was a little rough, and it lowered the beauty by a lot. Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing were both stunned at this time, and looked at Lin Wenwen with a strange expression. Their eyes were filled with surprise, novelty, confusion, and so on. Du Yuanqing couldn't help but say, What happened to you? Lin Wenwen was originally a little uncomfortable with her own style, but when she heard Du Yuanqing's words, she glared at him in annoyance. You're the one who was shocked. Didn't you guys tell me to cut my hair? Chapter 364. Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing immediately looked at Lin Xiao, meaning to say, She said it has nothing to do with us. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, I told you to cut it, so you cut it. Why do you listen to me so much? Haven't you thought about cutting it yourself? Your hair is so long, someone must have asked you to cut it before. Lin Wenwen awkwardly touched the short hair beside his ear and said, It was because the environment in the past wasn't as bad as it is now. Besides, even if I don't cut it, you guys will still despise me and that part of mine. Even if you cut it off, we would still despise it, the others said in their hearts. Lin Wen seemed to have sensed their gazes and asked, "Look at your eyes. Even if I cut my hair, you guys will also despise me." "Well, even if I cut my hair, it won't change anything," Long Qingying said expressionlessly. "Even if you want to change, you don't have to cut your hair." Lin Wenwen said, "No, it's convenient and easy to wash. And it will also save water. Isn't that even better?" Long Qingying looked at her silently. Lin Xiao said, "Suit yourself. But it's hard for you to cut your hair, which means that something has changed in your heart. Do as you see fit." Lin Wenwen looked at her and nodded. Then, he walked to the window and looked in the direction of the black clouds that occasionally brought with it the sound of thunder. He asked, "All right, when will the war stop? Won't they suffer a lot if they fight like this in the base?" Yuan Tianxing said, "There will definitely be losses, but whether it's big or not, it's not a big deal for them. It shouldn't be too big." Just as Lin Xiao was about to stand up and walk to the window to see what was going on, he suddenly felt a strange movement in the space. Her expression faltered for a moment before she disappeared from the sofa in a flash. After an afternoon and a night of energy absorption, Little Man finally had some movement. Lin Xiao appeared on the shore of the lake and looked at the surging waves of the lake. But this time the lake didn't rise. Instead, the energy in the water became denser. Perhaps because of the movement in the water, Lin Xiao looked back and found that Xin Yuzhen had hidden in a subspace. The zombie dog on the other side of the forest was also quietly lying down, not daring to move. The waves slowly calmed down. Lin Xiao thought that Little Man would stretch out her countless rattan tentacles. However, after waiting for a while, the familiar rattan did not emerge from the water. At that moment, she saw something in the water swimming towards the lake where she was standing. That vague shape. Why does it look like an octopus? Lin Xiao stared at the unknown object with widened eyes. It was swimming towards him with its short tentacles. As they got closer, Lin Xiao's expression became strange. There was surprise, delight, doubt, curiosity, and anticipation. That's right, the aura of the thing that was swimming towards her was Little Man. And from the looks of it, Little Man had already broken free from the situation of being fixed at the bottom of the lake and could run around on her own? Would she be able to come ashore? And why did it become smaller? The previous few times it had clearly changed drastically. Lin Xiao watched as the white object swam closer and closer in the water. He watched as she emerged from the water. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right, this jade white color was Little Man's original color. But this shape was a bit. There were a lot of vines on her head, but they were shortened to about 1 meter long. They were all hanging softly behind her white and chubby body. Little Man's face, neck, and stomach were all connected together. Because Lin Xiao couldn't see her stomach, she could only see her face, 2 big green eyes, a small nose, and no mouth. Her head and stomach were actually like a big carrot. The 2 ends were slightly smaller, while the stomach in the middle was big and fat. Below it were several thick white roots. Little Man blinked her pair of big watery green eyes. A few thick root legs propped up, and then she happily ran towards Lin Xiao. But just after she ran 2 steps, a few of her little roots mixed together. Then the child instantly fell to the ground, rolled twice, and then looked at the direction of the lake and rolled back. Little Man, is that you? Lin Xiao knew that it was Little Man, but she still couldn't help but call out to her in amusement. Little Man rolled twice in the lake before sitting up. Then she continued to climb out of the water, and then continued to swing her legs to run towards Lin Xiao. In the end, she fell again with a plop sound. Lin Xiao looked at her confused big eyes, and found it funny as he walked down. Then he bent down to hold her big belly and carried her up, and found that she wasn't very heavy. Mama, Little Man can come up and play, ha ha ha. As soon as he picked up Little Man, Lin Xiao's mind rang with Little Man's familiar tone. Lin Xiao hugged her, and found that this child's body wasn't hard, but felt like a sponge. Soft, bouncy, and very heavy. Little Man, why are you so heavy? Lin Xiao couldn't help but say. If she didn't have great strength after turning into a zombie, this little guy weighed at least 100 kilograms, and she definitely couldn't carry it. Little Man didn't have hands, but her hair that was as thick as a baby's finger, and her legs that were as thick as an adult's thumb, were swinging together. She happily sent a message to Lin Xiao. Mama, 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 this isn't Little Man Man's original form. Little Man Man can still become bigger. Mama, can you bring Tiny Tot in to play now? Little Man Man felt her breath outside. Lin Xiao curiously asked her, why did you let her in? Can't you go out with me now? Little Man Man wanted to shake her head, but found that her whole body was shaking. She almost fell from Lin Xiao's hand, so she had to stop. She swung her hair and said, no, Little Man Man can't go out and touch the air outside. The air outside will make it impossible for Little Man Man to survive. Lin Xiao was startled. She almost wanted to directly bring Little Man out. She didn't expect there would be such a problem. She curiously asked, huh? Why? Little Man Man said, Little Man Man can only survive in here by absorbing the lake water and the clean air here. And Mama, Little Man Man hasn't finished evolving yet. I'm about to enter the second stage of absorption, but I need to be with Mama. Lin Xiao nodded and said, clean air? Are you saying that the space outside isn't clean? Little Man twisted the vines in her hair and replied, yes, yes, the air outside will corrode Little Man's white body. Little Man won't go out. Lin Xiao asked, then how can you get out? Do I have to reach level 5? Haven't you reached level 4 yet? Little Man Man replied, it hasn't arrived yet. Mama, quickly go out and bring Tiny Tot in. Little Man Man wants to play with her, by the way, Mama. Quickly go and find someone you like. I want a man. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.